My name is Carlton. I am 69 years old, a retired civil engineer, and a widower. I thought I was simply doing my duty as a father when I opened my doors to my son who claimed he had hit rock bottom. But everything shattered a week later with a single frantic phone call from the previous owner of my house. He said he forgot to disconnect a hidden security camera in my living room. What he saw on that feed was not a struggling son needing help, but a predator planning my quiet execution. I smiled at the predators living under my roof, played the fool, and quietly prepared the most devastating trap they could never see coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people who should have loved you the most. I was sitting on my back porch, enjoying the quiet morning air with a cup of black coffee when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Vincent Gallagher. Vincent was the man who sold me this house a year ago. We had kept in touch occasionally about mail and property quirks, but a call at 7 in the morning was unusual. I answered expecting a question about a misdelivered package. Instead, his voice came through rushed, strained, and filled with absolute panic. "Carlton, listen to me very carefully," he said, his breath hitching. "Do not let them know you are on the phone. Are your son and his girlfriend in the house right now?" I frowned, setting my coffee mug down on the wooden table. "Yes, they are asleep upstairs." "What is going on, Vincent?" He let out a heavy, trembling sigh. "I am so sorry, Carlton. When I moved out, I completely forgot to remove a small security camera hidden inside the living room bookshelf. I only remembered it this morning and logged into the cloud server to delete the account. But Carlton, the camera was on. I saw them. I saw your son and that woman. They were standing by the kitchen counter. Carlton, they were grinding some sort of powder and pouring it into your blood pressure medication. You need to leave that house right now. Come to my place immediately. Do not drink or eat anything they give you." The morning air suddenly felt freezing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I thanked him, kept my voice perfectly steady, and hung up the phone. I did not pack a bag. I did not make a single sound. I simply grabbed my car keys from the hook by the back door, slipped out through the garage, and got into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. The drive to Vincent House was only 15 minutes, but it felt like an agonizing eternity. My mind raced, piecing together the events of the past week. Just 7 days ago, my 35-year-old son Terrell stood on my porch with tears in his eyes. He told me he had lost his corporate job, that the brutal economy had wiped out his savings, and that he and his girlfriend Chelsea had been evicted from their apartment. My late wife Evelyn had always warned me about Terrell. She used to say he had a greedy heart and a restless soul, that he viewed people as stepping stones rather than family. But he was my son. When he begged for a temporary roof over his head, I did what any father would do. I took them in. I gave them the master guest suite. I bought extra groceries. I offered him money to help him get back on his feet. He played the part of the broken, humbled man flawlessly. And Chelsea, with her bright smiles and polite manners, played the supportive, struggling girlfriend. They told me they were living on instant noodles and prayers before I saved them. Now, as I sped down the quiet suburban streets, the illusion of my grateful son dissolved into a terrifying reality. They were not broke. They were not broken. They were planning something sinister right under my nose, using my own home as the staging ground for my destruction. Vincent was waiting for me in his driveway. He looked pale, leading me straight into his home office without a word of small talk. His computer monitor was glowing in the dim room. He clicked a button, and the video playback began. I stood behind his chair, my breath caught in my throat, watching the crisp, high-definition footage of my own living room. The timestamp showed it was from 2 in the morning, just hours ago. The night vision mode illuminated the space clearly. There was Terrell, my own flesh and blood, standing by the kitchen island. Beside him was Chelsea, and they did not look like a destitute couple fighting for survival. Chelsea was wearing a silk designer robe that cost more than a month of groceries, and Terrell had on a brand new luxury watch that gleamed even in the low light. They were laughing, the kind of relaxed, arrogant laughter of people who thought they had already won the lottery. I watched as Chelsea pulled a small plastic bag from her pocket. She emptied the contents into a mortar and pestle from my own kitchen and began to grind it down into a fine dust. Terrell walked over to the cabinet where I kept my daily pill organizer. He took out my blood pressure capsules, carefully pulled the plastic casings apart, and handed them to Chelsea. She poured the mysterious white powder into my medication, closed the capsules, and placed them back perfectly. This old fool will not even know what hit him, Terrell whispered in the video, his voice captured crystal clear by the microphone. He thinks we are crying over unpaid rent. In a week, his brain will be so fried he will not even remember his own name, let alone where he keeps his checkbook. Chelsea giggled a chilling, sweet sound that made my stomach turn. Just make sure he signs the medical proxy before the heavy doses kick in, baby. Once I have legal control, we can finally cash out this oversized tomb. I stared at the screen, my entire body going numb. My own son. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had worked 60-hour weeks to put through college, was orchestrating my destruction. They did not just want my money. They wanted to erase my mind, turn me into a vegetable, and strip me of my dignity before tossing me aside like garbage. Vincent looked up at me, his eyes full of horror and pity. Carlton, we need to call the police right now. This is attempted murder. I took a deep, shaky breath, pushing the heartbreak down into a dark box and letting a cold, calculating rage take its place. No, Vincent. If we call the police now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding or a bad joke. I need more than a trespassing camera video to put them away for good. I need to catch them in a trap they built themselves. I will not just defend myself. I will utterly destroy them. I asked Vincent to transfer the video files to my secure cloud drive and to keep the camera active. I thanked him, walked back to my car, and drove home. I parked in the driveway, taking a moment to wipe the anger from my face. I had to become the man they thought I was, slow, trusting, and blindly affectionate. An old fool ripe for the picking. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of expensive bacon and fresh coffee. Chelsea stepped out of the kitchen looking like the picture of innocent domesticity in her modest sweatpants and messy bun. The silk robe and the wicked smirk from the video were completely hidden behind a mask of pure affection. She held a steaming mug in her hands and walked toward me with a gentle, caring smile. "Good morning, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I noticed you were up early and went for a drive. I made you a special cup of herbal tea. You have been looking so tired and forgetful lately. Drink this. It will help calm your nerves and keep your mind sharp." She extended her hand, looking me right in the eyes, offering me the poison wrapped in porcelain. I reached out and took the ceramic mug from her hands. The heat radiated through the thick glaze, but it felt like pure ice pressing against my palms. I walked past her into the open kitchen space. Terrell was sitting at the marble island typing furiously away on a sleek silver MacBook Pro. That machine easily cost over $2,000, which was hardly the tool of a man who claimed he could not afford to buy a pack of instant noodles. He looked up from the screen and flashed a bright $1,000,000 smile that used to fill me with fatherly pride. Now it just turned my stomach. "Morning, Dad," he said smoothly. "Chelsea made that brew just for you. She read online that those specific herbs are great for memory retention and focus." I pulled out a wooden stool and sat across from him. I stared down into the amber liquid, watching the thin wisps of steam rise into the air. I could almost see the crushed white powder dissolving into the murky brew. "That is very thoughtful of you, Chelsea," I said, keeping my voice low and slightly raspy. I played the part of the tired, declining old man perfectly. But my stomach is feeling a bit unsettled this morning. Maybe I should just stick to a glass of cold water. Chelsea stepped up right beside me, her hand resting heavily on my shoulder. The sweet floral scent of her perfume, the same scent I had noticed lingering in my home for the past week, was overwhelming. "Oh, come on, Dad," she insisted. "You have to drink it while it is hot. It is a special blend, and I spent 20 minutes brewing it just right. You do not want it to go to waste, do you?" The atmospheric pressure in the room immediately thickened. Terrell closed his laptop halfway and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on predatory. "Drink it, Dad. You know you have been leaving your car keys everywhere this week. And yesterday you asked me the exact same question twice. We are just looking out for your health. We want you around for a long, long time." The sheer audacity of his words made my jaw tighten. They were trying to gaslight me right to my face, laying the psychological groundwork for my supposed mental decline. I forced my right hand to tremble violently. I lifted the mug slightly, letting the hot liquid slosh dangerously against the rim. "My hands are just a little shaky today," I murmured, putting on a masterful show of vulnerability. "Getting old is not for the faint of heart, kids." Chelsea leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the mug like a hawk watching a trapped mouse. "Just take a big sip, Dad. It will calm those tremors right down. I promise you will feel so much better." I brought the mug closer to my lips. I could see the raw anticipation burning in their eyes. They were holding their breath, waiting for me to consume the poison that would slowly erase my cognitive functions. But my decades working as a senior civil engineer had taught me one universal truth. Gravity is the absolute most reliable force on Earth. I let my hand jerk violently to the left. The heavy mug slipped from my grasp, tilting forward with calculated, lethal precision. The scalding hot herbal tea cascaded across the marble island, flowing like a rushing river straight into the keyboard of Terrell's expensive MacBook. The ceramic mug shattered loudly against the aluminum edge of the laptop, splashing the remaining sticky liquid directly across the retina display. Terrell jumped back, his heavy wooden chair screeching horribly against the hardwood floor. "Are you kidding me?" he roared. The mask of the loving, patient son disintegrated in a fraction of a second. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged for the laptop, frantically grabbing paper napkins to wipe the drenched keyboard. "This is a $3,000 machine. What is wrong with you, you clumsy old fool?" The venom in his voice was raw, unfiltered, and genuine. For 30 seconds, he completely forgot his carefully constructed role. He forgot he was supposed to be the destitute, grateful son begging for charity. He hurled a string of vicious curses, his true nature spilling out as fast as the poisoned tea dripping onto the floor. "Do you have any idea what you just did? My entire life is on this hard drive." Chelsea lost her fake sweetness immediately. Her face turned crimson red, her hands flying to her head in absolute panic. "Terrell, the files! The property documents!" She screamed, her voice shrill and terrified. She grabbed a thick kitchen towel and started dabbing at the screen, aggressively shoving me out of the way without a single second thought. "Get him out of the way, just flip it over, Terrell. Flip it over before the liquid seeps into the motherboard." I stood back, clutching my supposedly trembling hand against my chest, playing the frightened, confused elder to perfection. "I am so incredibly sorry," I stammered, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound truly terrified. My hand just gave out entirely. "I did not mean to ruin your computer. Please let me help you wipe it down." Terrell whipped his head around, his eyes blazing with a deep, dark hatred that chilled my blood. "Do not touch it. Do not touch anything else in this kitchen. Just sit down and stay out of the way before you break something else." They were in total chaos. Terrell was frantically shaking the laptop upside down, brown water dripping onto the pristine floor tiles, while Chelsea was running around slamming cabinet doors looking for a bag of dry rice. Their entire focus was completely locked on saving the ruined machine. This was my window. While they were screaming at each other, loudly cursing my clumsiness and old age, I took 2 quick, perfectly silent steps toward the hallway medicine cabinet. My heart was beating in a steady, controlled rhythm. I reached into my deep jacket pocket and pulled out a brand new identical bottle of my prescribed blood pressure medication. I had bought it at the local pharmacy months ago as a travel backup. I opened the cabinet door just a fraction of an inch. My eyes immediately found the plastic bottle they had tampered with sitting innocently on the second shelf. My hands did not shake at all now. With the swift, precise movements of a man who spent his entire life handling delicate architectural instruments, I grabbed the poisoned bottle and slid it deep into my inner jacket pocket. In the exact same fluid motion, I placed the untampered, identical bottle right back in its designated spot. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. I closed the cabinet without making a single sound. By the time Chelsea turned around with a large bag of rice, I was standing exactly where I was before wringing my hands and looking at the floor with wide, apologetic eyes. "I can pay for the repairs, Terrell," I offered meekly, keeping my head bowed. "Or I can write you a check to go buy a brand new one this afternoon." Terrell glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. "Just go to the living room, Dad. We will deal with this mess. Chelsea, get the hairdryer from the upstairs bathroom right now." I nodded slowly and shuffled away, my posture stooped and defeated. But inside my jacket pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the poisoned bottle. I had successfully secured the physical evidence of their crime. Later that night, the house was dead quiet. Terrell and Chelsea were locked inside the master guest suite, likely mourning the loss of the laptop and fighting over lost data. I slipped out of my bedroom, bypassing the creaky floorboards I knew by heart, and silently made my way down to the dark kitchen. I needed to know exactly why they were in such an aggressive rush to take over my assets. I opened the lid of the heavy stainless steel trash can and began sifting through the debris, wearing latex gloves to avoid leaving prints. Beneath a layer of wet coffee grounds and crumpled paper towels, My fingers brushed against thick premium printer paper. I pulled it out carefully. It was a torn document clearly printed from Terrell's ruined laptop earlier that day, just before the tea incident. I laid the ripped halves together on the counter under the dim light of the stove hood. It was a commercial property valuation report for this exact street address. I bought this house a year ago for $400,000. But according to the bold red ink printed on this highly confidential appraisal, my property was currently valued at a staggering $5 million. I placed the torn valuation report into a clear plastic folder, sliding it right next to the tampered bottle of blood pressure medication inside my leather briefcase. The next morning, I dressed in my usual comfortable slacks and a simple polo shirt, maintaining the illusion of a carefree retiree. I walked down the stairs with a slow, measured gait. Terrell and Chelsea were in the kitchen eating breakfast, their eyes briefly tracking my movements with that same predatory calculation I had seen on the hidden camera. I told them I was heading to the local hardware store to look at some gardening tools and would take a long walk around the park afterward. Terrell simply nodded, barely looking up from his phone, while Chelsea offered another one of her sickeningly sweet smiles, telling me to enjoy the fresh air. They had no idea I was driving straight downtown to the financial district. I parked my car inside a secure underground garage and took the private elevator up to the 20th floor of a sleek glass building. I was there to see Jonathan Kaplan. Jonathan was an elite financial fraud attorney, a man possessing a mind like a steel trap and a reputation for dismantling corporate embezzlers with ruthless efficiency. I had consulted him years ago during a complex zoning dispute involving my engineering firm, and we had maintained a strong mutual respect ever since. When I walked into his spacious office overlooking the city skyline, Jonathan greeted me warmly. But his professional smile faded the moment I sat down and placed the clear plastic folder on his massive mahogany desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the poisoned pill bottle, the torn property valuation document, and a secure USB drive containing the video footage from Vincent House. I explained everything in a calm, flat tone, letting the undeniable evidence speak for itself. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the low hum of the air conditioning. He picked up the taped pieces of the valuation report, his sharp eyes scanning the bold red numbers. $5 million, Jonathan muttered, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. Carlton, you bought that property for $400,000. Even with the current market inflation, residential houses in your specific zip code cap out at maybe $600,000. There is absolutely no organic economic reason for this property to jump to $5 million overnight. Unless someone knows something the rest of the city does not. He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with lightning speed. He accessed a private legal database cross-referencing my street address with recent municipal filings, commercial zoning permits, and sealed city council agendas. I watched his face shift from intense focus to absolute shock. He turned one of his monitors toward me. Here it is, he said, his voice dropping an octave. The City Council has a sealed, highly confidential proposal scheduled for public release next month. A massive global technology conglomerate has selected your exact grid to build their new multi-billion-dollar core data center and commercial tech hub. The city is preparing to rezone your entire neighborhood for commercial use. The developers need to buy out the current homeowners, and they have allocated a massive budget to do so. Your lot is dead center in the proposed development zone. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking together, but the ugliest truth was yet to come. Jonathan opened a new search window and began running a background check on Chelsea. You mentioned her last name is Kensington? Jonathan asked, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. I nodded. He let out a harsh, cynical laugh and shook his head. Carlton Chelsea is not just some random woman who happened to move in with your son. She is Chelsea Kensington. Her father is Richard Kensington. My blood ran cold at the sound of that name. Everyone in the local engineering and construction business knew who Richard Kensington was. He was a notorious, ruthless real estate mogul who made his fortune through hostile takeovers, aggressive gentrification, and allegedly bribing city officials to get advance notice on zoning changes. He is a predator who buys properties for pennies on the dollar right before a major development is announced. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Richard Kensington knows about the tech hub. He is using his daughter to infiltrate your home. This valuation report is an internal document from Kensington's own acquisition firm. The plan is diabolically simple. They drug you until your cognitive functions deteriorate. They get a corrupt doctor to declare you medically incompetent due to severe dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Once you are legally incapacitated, Terrell, being your only living relative, petitions the court for full conservatorship. He gets complete legal control over your assets. Then Terrell quietly sells your $5 million home to Richard Kensington Shell Company for the original $400,000. To the outside world, it looks like a desperate son liquidating assets to pay for his sick father medical care. But in reality, they bypass the open market entirely, hand the golden ticket to Richard, and split the millions in hidden profits behind closed doors while you rot away in a low-budget psychiatric facility. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the office. My own son was willing to erase my mind and sell my freedom to a corrupt billionaire just to get a payout. The sheer scale of the betrayal threatened to crush me, but I refused to let it. I looked at Jonathan, my voice steady and completely void of fear. I want to build a trap, Jonathan. A legal and financial trap they cannot escape. I do not just want to stop them. I want them to lose everything. Jonathan smiled, a predatory gleam lighting up his eyes. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and grabbed a silver pen. First, we send these tampered pills to a private independent toxicology lab. We need a certified chemical analysis of exactly what they are feeding you to establish a solid case for attempted murder and elder abuse. But financially, we strike back today. We are going to establish an irrevocable trust. We will transfer the deed of your house, all your retirement accounts, and your liquid assets directly into this trust. You will be the sole beneficiary, but you will legally relinquish the power to sell the property or withdraw large sums without the approval of an independent corporate trustee, which will be my law firm. Once the ink dries on that document, your house is locked in a fortress. Even if they manage to get a judge to grant Terrell conservatorship, he will have absolutely zero legal authority to sell the house or touch the principal funds. We will let them spend their time, their money, and their energy executing their master plan only to find out the vault is completely empty. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the preliminary documents. I signed every page with a firm, unwavering hand. I was no longer the grieving widower or the accommodating father. I was an engineer reinforcing a structure against a massive storm. Jonathan assured me the trust would be fully active and legally binding within 48 hours. He also provided me with a secure encrypted mobile phone to use for our communications, instructing me to keep my regular phone accessible to Terrell and Chelsea to avoid suspicion. I left his office feeling a profound sense of clarity. The grief was gone, replaced entirely by a cold, tactical resolve. I drove back to my neighborhood, pulling onto my quiet suburban street just as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the trees. As I approached my driveway, I noticed a large white utility van parked near my front lawn. The side of the van read Advanced Security and Locksmith Services. I parked my car and walked up the driveway. The loud, piercing screech of a power drill echoed from my front porch. A man in heavy canvas overalls was drilling directly into the solid wood of my front door, dismantling the standard lock I had used for a year. Terrell was standing on the porch with his arms crossed, watching the locksmith install a massive industrial-grade deadbolt system with an electronic keypad. I walked up the steps, putting on my best, confused, slightly anxious expression. "Terrell, what is going on here?" I asked, gesturing to the dismantled door frame. Terrell turned to me, plastering on a perfectly warm, reassuring smile. "Do not worry about a thing, Dad. I was checking the neighborhood watch app this morning and saw there have been a string of aggressive break-ins a few blocks over. With you forgetting to lock the doors lately, Chelsea and I just got worried about your safety. I paid for this upgraded security system out of my own pocket. We just want to make sure you are safe and sound inside your own home." I stared at the heavy metal bolts sliding into the door frame. He spoke about keeping burglars out, but looking at the industrial locking mechanism, I knew the chilling truth. They were not upgrading the security to keep strangers out. They were modifying the locks to ensure that when the drugs finally took hold, I would never be able to get out. The following morning marked the official beginning of their psychological warfare. I woke up and went downstairs to make my usual pot of coffee. I reached for my car keys on the brass hook by the front door, planning to keep up the charade of my morning drive. The hook was empty. I checked my pockets, the kitchen counter, and the small table in the hallway. Nothing. I walked into the dining room where Terrell and Chelsea were eating breakfast. I asked them if they had seen my keys. Chelsea set down her fork, her face contorting into a mask of exaggerated, pitiful concern. "Dad," she said slowly, speaking to me as if I were a toddler. You put them in the refrigerator last night. Remember, you were looking for the milk and you just left them right next to the butter. I stood there, letting my shoulders slump. I did not put my keys in the refrigerator. I had placed them on that brass hook the moment I walked in from Jonathan's office. But I nodded slowly, rubbing my temples, playing the part of a man whose mind was slipping through his fingers. 2 days later, the manipulation escalated from petty tricks to outright endangerment. I was sitting in my armchair in the living room reading a book when a sharp, distinct smell filled the air. Gas. I stood up and shuffled toward the kitchen. The front left burner of the stove was turned on, releasing raw gas into the room, but there was no flame. Before I could even reach the dial, Terrell came sprinting down the stairs. He lunged past me, twisting the knob off with a violent jerk, and then threw open the kitchen window. "Dad, what are you doing?" he yelled, his voice echoing through the house. His face was a picture of manufactured panic. "You left the gas on. You could have blown the entire house to pieces." Chelsea rushed into the room, gasping loudly and covering her mouth. "Oh my goodness, Terrell, he is getting worse. He could have killed us all." I looked at the stove, then at my son. I had not been in the kitchen for over 3 hours. They had turned the dial themselves, waiting for the smell to permeate the house just to stage this theatrical confrontation. They were actively building a narrative, a documented history of my supposed severe cognitive decline. I lowered my head, forcing my hands to shake, and mumbled a broken apology. I told them I just forgot. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted. If they needed a broken, senile old man to make their plan work, I was going to give them an Oscar-winning performance. I needed them absolutely overconfident. I needed them to believe their poison tea and tampered capsules had completely destroyed my neurological pathways. An arrogant predator is a careless predator. That night I waited until I heard the television playing in their bedroom. I put on my pajamas, walked out into the dark hallway, and began to wander aimlessly. I let my posture droop, dragging my feet across the hardwood floor. "Evelyn." I called out, my voice trembling and weak. "Evelyn, where are you, honey? I cannot find the bedroom." The bedroom door opened and Terrell stepped out. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of genuine triumph in his eyes before he quickly masked it with fake sorrow. "Dad." "Mom has been gone for years," he said softly, guiding me by the arm. "Come on, let us get you back to bed." The next afternoon, I delivered the ultimate degradation. I was sitting on the living room sofa while Chelsea was scrolling through her phone on the armchair opposite me. I held a glass of warm water in my hand. While she was distracted, I casually tipped the glass, pouring the warm liquid directly onto my lap. I let the glass slip from my fingers, thudding onto the thick rug. I let out a pathetic, distressed whimper. Chelsea looked up, her nose wrinkling in immediate visceral disgust as she saw the dark, wet stain spreading across my trousers. "Terrell!" she shrieked, jumping up from the chair. "He wet himself. Your father just wet himself right on the good sofa." Terrell rushed into the room. He stared at the stain, a sickening smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. "It is okay, Dad," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Let us get you cleaned up. The drugs are really kicking in fast," he whispered to Chelsea as he pulled me up. As he marched me up the stairs like a disgraced child, I felt a burning humiliation. But beneath that humiliation was a cold, impenetrable armor. They thought they had broken my dignity. They did not realize I was simply laying the bait. My performance worked flawlessly. Convinced that I was completely incapacitated and incapable of understanding my surroundings, Terrell and Chelsea left the house the following morning to meet with Richard Kensington. They locked the new heavy-duty deadbolt from the outside, leaving me trapped inside what they believed was my mental prison. As soon as I heard their car pull out of the driveway, I retrieved my encrypted phone and sent a single text message to Jonathan. 10 minutes later, a white utility van pulled up to my back gate. 2 men dressed in generic broadband technician uniforms stepped out. They were not utility workers. They were Jonathan private security and surveillance contractors. I let them in through the back door. They moved with absolute silent efficiency. They swapped out the standard electrical outlets in the living room, the kitchen, and the main hallway with custom-built identical replicas. Hidden inside the tiny grounding holes of these new outlets were state-of-the-art, high-definition cameras and high-fidelity microphones. The system was hardwired directly into the house electrical grid and transmitted data seamlessly to a highly secure server at Jonathan Law Firm. Within 45 minutes, my house was transformed into a digital fortress. I was no longer their prisoner. I was the warden, and they had just locked themselves inside my cell. The trap was set perfectly hidden in plain sight. The following afternoon, I was sitting by the window staring blankly at the wall, playing my part to the bitter end. The sound of the heavy deadbolt clicking echoed through the foyer. The front door swung open. Terrell walked in, radiating a smug, victorious energy. He was not alone. Behind him stepped a man wearing a pristine, pressed white medical coat and holding a sleek leather medical bag. The man had sharp, calculating eyes that scanned the room, landing on me with the cold appraisal of a butcher looking at a piece of meat. "Dad," Terrell said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet house. "I brought someone to see you. Since your memory has been so bad lately, the doctor is here for your routine checkup." The man in the white coat introduced himself as Dr. Thorne. He did not carry the exhausted, empathetic aura of a real medical professional who spent his days caring for the sick. He moved with the slick, polished arrogance of a high-end car salesman. He sat down heavily in the armchair opposite mine, crossing one perfectly tailored leg over the other, and pulled a thick leather binder from his sleek messenger bag. Terrell and Chelsea hovered nearby, flanking the sofa like prison guards, making absolutely sure the inmate did not step out of line or try to escape the interrogation. "Doctor." Thorne clicked his expensive silver pen and looked at me over the rim of his designer reading glasses. "Carlton, your son tells me you have been having a rather difficult time lately, managing your daily routine," he began, his voice dripping with synthetic, rehearsed sympathy. "Leaving the gas stove on, misplacing your keys, forgetting where you are inside your own home. That must be incredibly frightening for a man who used to be so independent." I kept my head bowed, staring blankly at my own hands resting in my lap. I let a long, uncomfortable silence stretch across the room, letting them think I was struggling to process the basic words coming out of his mouth before I offered a slow, confused nod. The doctor did not even bother taking my pulse, shining a light in my eyes, or checking my blood pressure. He went straight into the psychological evaluation, and his questions were not designed to accurately assess my cognitive health. They were highly manipulative, designed to trap me into a specific predetermined diagnosis. "You often feel like the current year is actually a decade ago, do you not, Carlton?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before scribbling something onto his notepad. "And when you look at Terrell, you sometimes fail to recognize him as your own son, correct?" I mumbled a vague, incoherent sound, rocking my shoulders slightly. Dr. Thorne smiled, a cold, clinical stretching of his lips that did not reach his eyes. He leaned forward, tapping his pen against the crisp paper. "Stage 2 Alzheimer's disease can be exceptionally aggressive, Carlton. It causes severe disorientation and total loss of executive function. You are a danger to yourself living without strict, round-the-clock supervision. You need to formally relinquish your medical and financial proxy to your son before you accidentally burn this beautiful house to the ground." He was writing the diagnosis before the examination even concluded. It was a complete sham, a kangaroo court disguised as a medical consultation. I knew exactly what they needed for their fraudulent paperwork, and I decided to give them a performance worthy of a front-row theater seat. I slowly lifted my head, bypassing Dr. Thorne completely, and fixed my gaze on the blank beige wall just over his right shoulder. I let my eyes widen in a mixture of awe and childlike confusion. "Evelyn," I whispered, letting my voice crack with fragile, desperate emotion. "Evelyn, baby, why are you standing over there in the corner?" The room instantly went dead silent. Dr. Thorne stopped writing. I could see Terrell and Chelsea exchanging a look of absolute victorious glee out of the corner of my eye. I raised a trembling hand, reaching out toward the empty drywall. "You promised you would help me paint the nursery today, Evelyn. The baby is coming so soon. Why are you wearing that old blue dress? You said you threw that away after the church picnic last summer, Doctor." Thorne scribbled furiously, his pen practically tearing through the thick paper. He looked up at Terrell, giving him a firm, validating nod. Visual and auditory hallucinations, the fake doctor stated aloud, ensuring his voice was clear and authoritative for the official record. "Severe detachment from current chronological reality. This is textbook progression for rapid onset dementia." I did not break character for a single second. I kept my hand outstretched, a single genuine tear rolling down my cheek as I spoke to the empty wall, channeling the real grief of losing my wife into a weapon against them. "Tell the man to leave Evelyn. He is tracking mud all over the new carpet. We just paid for this carpet." Chelsea stepped forward, covering her mouth to hide a massive, wicked grin that threatened to break her facade. "Oh, Terrell, it is so much worse than we thought. she cooed, her voice practically vibrating with greedy excitement. "He is completely lost in the past. We have to do the right thing and take over for him. He cannot make legal decisions like this." Dr. Thorne closed his leather binder with a sharp, decisive snap. "I have seen enough," he declared, standing up and straightening his pristine white coat. "I will draft the official medical affidavit tonight. It will state unequivocally that Carlton is entirely incapacitated and legally unfit to manage his estate, his finances, or his personal welfare. Tyrell, you will have the documentation you need for the conservatorship hearing by tomorrow morning." I lowered my hand and let my chin rest on my chest, rocking slightly back and forth. Deep inside, my mind was sharp, focused, and utterly ruthless. They thought they had secured their golden ticket. They had no idea that the tiny grounding hole in the electrical outlet directly behind Dr. Thorne had captured every single second of this fraudulent medical assessment in glorious high-definition video. "Doctor." Thorne turned to leave, and Chelsea immediately offered to walk him out to his car. Tyrell stayed in the living room, hovering over me with a look of absolute disgust, now that the doctor was no longer watching his performance. He did not even bother to speak to me, pulling out his phone to furiously text someone, likely Richard Kensington, to deliver the triumphant news. But my attention was entirely focused on the digital trap waiting in the foyer. The electrical outlet right next to the front door housed one of Jonathan Custom's hidden cameras. Later that afternoon, when they left the house for lunch, I retrieved my encrypted phone and accessed the secure server to review the hallway footage. It was a masterpiece of criminal evidence. The video showed Chelsea and Dr. Thorne standing by the front door, away from Tyrell prying eyes. Chelsea reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, bulging manila envelope. She pressed it directly into the doctor's hand. $10,000 in untraceable cash, just like my father promised. She whispered the hidden microphone, picking up her voice with crystal clarity. "Make sure the medical affidavit is bulletproof. The judge cannot find a single loophole." Dr. Thorne tucked the envelope into his inside coat pocket, flashing a greedy, conspiratorial smile. "Do not worry, Chelsea. I have done this a dozen times for your father. By tomorrow, your boyfriend will have full legal control over the old man and everything he owns. Then you can drop the dead weight and cash out." That night, I lay in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. The house was perfectly still, the silence heavy with the weight of the impending war. I knew they were celebrating their perceived victory in the master suite down the hall. They believed I was permanently neutralized. They believed the $5 million real estate payout was just a few days away. Then the screen of my encrypted phone lit up, casting a harsh white glow across my face. It was an automated fraud alert from my primary banking institution, a direct line I had set up with Jonathan. But it was not for an account I recognized. A brand new ultra-premium credit card had just been opened under my name and social security number. The notification boldly displayed the first approved transaction. A staggering $25,000 had just been swiped at an exclusive downtown jewelry boutique for a luxury Rolex watch. They were not waiting for the conservatorship to go through. The ink on the fake medical evaluation was not even dry, and they were already bleeding my identity dry. The morning sun felt cold as I stared at the digital receipt for the $25,000 watch. They were moving at lightning speed, fueled by absolute greed and arrogance. I knew I had to move faster. While Tyrell and Chelsea slept off their celebratory night, confident that their fraudulent medical evaluation had sealed my fate, I quietly left the house and drove straight to Jonathan's office. The paperwork for the irrevocable trust was already laid out on his massive mahogany desk, neatly organized and waiting for my signature. Jonathan handed me a heavy fountain pen, his expression dead serious and intensely focused. "Once you sign these documents, Carlton, you legally surrender your individual power to sell the property or withdraw the principal assets," he explained, pointing to the thick stack of legal jargon. "The trust becomes the absolute and undisputed owner. You remain the sole beneficiary, meaning you can live there and receive income for the rest of your life, but the physical deed is locked in an impenetrable legal vault. Even if Tyrell walks into a courtroom tomorrow with that fake medical affidavit and a corrupt judge grants him full conservatorship over your life, he will have absolutely zero authority to sell your home to anyone." I took the pen, feeling the smooth metal against my skin. There was no hesitation in my mind. I signed my name on the dotted line, pressing down hard enough to leave an indentation on the wood beneath the thick paper. With each signature, I was quietly stripping away the very foundation of their malicious master plan. Terrell and Chelsea thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess, maneuvering their pieces to capture the king. They had no idea I was quietly removing the entire board from underneath them. We finalized the transfer of my liquid retirement accounts and the physical deed to the house. The documents were notarized, sealed, and instantly filed with the county clerk through a secure digital portal. The $5 million gold mine they were so desperately trying to steal was now legally untouchable. "Let them get their conservatorship," I said to Jonathan, sliding the pen back across the desk. "Let them think they have won the grand prize. I cannot wait to see the looks on their faces when they realize the vault is entirely empty." We then turned our attention to the fraudulent credit card alert from the night before. I pulled out my encrypted phone and showed Jonathan the notification for the $25,000 Rolex. The immediate logical reaction for any normal victim would be to call the bank, cancel the card, and freeze my credit profile to stop the bleeding immediately. But Jonathan and I were not playing a defensive game anymore. We were building an airtight federal indictment. "Do not cancel the card," Jonathan instructed, a sharp tactical edge to his voice. "If you cancel it now, they will just assume the bank flagged it as a standard security anomaly. They will pivot, find another way to bleed your finances and cover their tracks. Instead, we are going to let them keep spending. We will let them dig their own graves so deep they will never climb out." He logged into a secure banking portal and connected me directly with a senior fraud investigator he frequently collaborated with. I verified my identity and explicitly stated that the new account had been opened fraudulently using my stolen personal information. However, per Jonathan's legal strategy, we requested that the bank keep the line of credit temporarily open and actively monitor the IP addresses, shipping locations, and physical surveillance footage associated with every single transaction. By opening a line of credit across state lines using digital applications and stolen social security numbers, Terrell and Chelsea were not just committing petty theft, they were committing first-degree wire fraud and identity theft, which are severe federal crimes. Every time they swiped that card to buy luxury goods, they were adding years to their inevitable federal prison sentences. "The FBI takes a very specific interest in wire fraud that crosses a certain financial threshold," Jonathan explained, pulling up a digital case file on his monitor. "We are going to let them hit that threshold. We will document every luxury purchase, every wire transfer, and every forged signature. When the trap finally snaps shut, it will not be a local civil dispute over a misunderstood elderly father. It will be a fully coordinated federal criminal raid." I left his office feeling a dark, powerful sense of satisfaction. I was quietly funding the very rope they were going to use to hang themselves. I drove back to my house and parked in the driveway, taking a deep, steadying breath to slip back into my character of the failing, confused old man. The house was dead quiet when I walked inside. Terrell and Chelsea were likely out parading their newly acquired Rolex, blissfully unaware of the federal legal crosshairs currently locked onto their backs. I shuffled into the living room, turned on the television to a random daytime channel, and sank into my armchair. The afternoon dragged on with a suffocating, heavy tension. I knew the storm was coming, but I did not expect it to arrive directly at my front door so soon. Just past 4 o'clock, the sharp, sudden chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. I did not move immediately. I accessed the hidden porch camera through my encrypted phone. A massive, sleek black Bentley was parked aggressively close to my front lawn, its engine purring with quiet, expensive power. A man stepped out of the vehicle. He was an older white man, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that screamed old money and corporate ruthlessness. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, smoothed back his silver hair, and walked up my porch steps with the heavy, entitled stride of a man who owned everything he touched. I knew exactly who this was. I had seen his face on local business magazines and zoning dispute articles for years. It was Richard Kensington, Chelsea father, the billionaire predator who was pulling the strings behind my son. I slowly pulled myself up from the armchair, deliberately adopting a slight tremble in my hands, and shuffled toward the foyer. I unlatched the heavy deadbolt Terrell had installed and pulled the front door open. Richard Kensington stood towering on my porch, his cold slate-gray eyes analyzing me with absolute contempt. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite handshake. He simply pushed his way past me, stepping right into my home as if he had already purchased the deed. He looked around the foyer, his gaze lingering on the crown molding and the hardwood floors before snapping back down to me. He flashed a brilliant shark-like smile that sent a visceral chill straight down my spine. "Hello there, future-in-law," Richard said, his voice smooth but laced with unmistakable malice. He slowly walked over to the wooden staircase leading up to the second floor, tapping his polished leather shoe against the bottom step. "You know, you really should be careful. This house has some incredibly steep stairs. It is very, very easy for a confused old man to slip, take a nasty fall, and tragically break his neck." I stared into Richard Kensington, cold, predatory eyes, maintaining the blank, slightly vacant expression of a man whose mind was slowly slipping away. Before I could formulate a confused response to his horrific threat about the stairs, the sound of a key turning in the lock broke the heavy tension. Terrell and Chelsea walked through the front door carrying bags of expensive takeout from a high-end steakhouse. Chelsea's face instantly lit up with genuine delight when she saw her father standing in my foyer. She rushed over and threw her arms around him, playing the role of the devoted daughter while Terrell hovered nervously in the background. His posture immediately stiffened his shoulders, hunching slightly like a subordinate employee standing before a ruthless corporate boss. Richard smoothed his expensive suit jacket and clapped Terrell heavily on the back, a gesture that looked friendly but carried the unmistakable force of a warning. They ushered me into the dining room, setting the table with porcelain plates and pouring glasses of a robust vintage red wine Richard had brought from his private cellar. The dinner that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Richard sat at the head of the table, a position he assumed naturally dominating the room with his booming voice and arrogant demeanor. He carved his rare steak with aggressive, precise strokes of his knife, his eyes constantly darting toward me. He made a series of veiled, highly calculated threats disguised as deep concern for my welfare. "It is a dangerous world for the elderly, Carlton," Richard said, taking a slow sip of his wine. "The statistics on household accidents are truly staggering. A slip in the shower, a sudden fall down those beautiful wooden stairs in the hallway, or a tragic mix-up with prescription medications. Life is incredibly fragile. It is why we must ensure our assets are transitioned to the next generation before it is too late." I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to intimidate me to see if there was any spark of comprehension left in my eyes. I refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I leaned fully into my performance. I let my hand shake violently as I tried to lift a forkful of mashed potatoes. The food slipped from the silver prongs, falling with a wet thud onto my pristine shirt collar. I let a bit of drool escape the corner of my mouth and chewed with my mouth slightly open, staring blankly at the chandelier above us. I mumbled a stream of incoherent, joyful nonsense, praising Terrell for being such a wonderful, successful son, and thanking Chelsea for taking such good care of me. The disgust on their faces was palpable. Richard curled his upper lip in pure revulsion, looking away from me as if I were a piece of rotting garbage. Terrell rolled his eyes, his face flushing with embarrassment, while Chelsea patronized me with a sickeningly sweet voice, reaching over to wipe my chin with a napkin like I was an infant. They completely bought the act. In their arrogant minds, I was already gone. Halfway through the miserable meal, I let out a loud, pathetic sigh and announced that I needed to use the restroom. I pushed my chair back clumsily, allowing it to scrape loudly against the hardwood floor, and shuffled out of the dining room with a heavy, dragging gait. I walked into the downstairs bathroom, closed the solid oak door, and instantly dropped the senile facade. I stood up perfectly straight, my mind sharp and racing. I turned on the sink faucet, letting the water run at full pressure to mask any sound. Then I pulled my encrypted mobile phone from my pocket and opened the secure surveillance application. The camera hidden inside the dining room electrical outlet provided a crystal-clear, high-definition feed of the table I had just left. The moment I was out of earshot, the polite masks completely disintegrated. Richard slammed his heavy fist onto the wooden table, making the wine glasses rattle violently. The air of fake civility vanished, replaced by the raw, cutthroat aggression of a billionaire used to getting exactly what he wanted. His face turned a dark shade of red as he glared directly at Terrell. "I am done waiting," Richard snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The fake medical report is signed and filed. You have the doctor in your pocket. Why is this taking so long? I want the power of attorney finalized and the physical deed transferred to my holding company by the end of the week." Terrell shrank back in his chair, visibly sweating under the intense pressure of the older man's wrath. "Sir, we are moving as fast as we can," Terrell stammered, his usual arrogance completely evaporating. "The courts have a mandatory waiting period for conservatorship hearings. We just need a few more days to get him to sign the final proxy documents before the judge officially strips his rights. We have to make it look legitimate. Richard leaned across the table, grabbing Terrell roughly by the collar of his expensive shirt, pulling him inches from his face. Chelsea sat calmly sipping her wine, watching her father manhandle her boyfriend without a single ounce of empathy. "I do not care about looking legitimate," Richard hissed, his eyes burning with lethal intent. "The city council is voting on the tech hub rezoning in 10 days. I need that property secured before the public announcement drives the price up to $8 million. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little boy. I need the deed by next weekend. If you mess up this $5 million deal, you will not just lose my daughter. I will personally send my people to shatter both of your kneecaps. I will ruin your life and leave you drinking out of a straw. Do you understand me?" Terrell swallowed hard, his face pale with absolute terror, and nodded frantically. Richard released him with a look of utter contempt, picked up his suit jacket, and stormed out of the dining room. I waited in the bathroom for another 3 minutes, staring at the screen as Terrell sat at the table, running his trembling hands over his face while Chelsea callously reapplied her lipstick. The dynamic was brilliantly clear. Terrell was not the mastermind. He was just a desperate, greedy pawn caught in the jaws of a much larger, much more dangerous predator. I turned off the faucet, hunched my shoulders back into my defeated posture, and shuffled back out into the living room. Richard had already left the house, the roar of his Bentley engine fading down the street. Terrell and Chelsea immediately grabbed their wine glasses and walked out through the sliding glass doors onto the back patio, needing to decompress from the explosive confrontation. They left me entirely alone to clean up the messy dining table, assuming the clueless old man was only good for doing the dishes. I began gathering the plates, moving quietly through the living room. As I reached over the large plush sofa to grab a discarded napkin, my highly trained ears caught a faint rhythmic sound. It was a low, muffled buzzing. I froze, tilting my head to pinpoint the source. The vibration was coming directly from deep within the cushions of the sofa where Terrell had been sitting earlier that afternoon. I set the plates down on the coffee table and reached my hand down into the tight crevice between the thick upholstery. My fingers brushed against hard, cold plastic. I pulled it out. It was a cheap, prepaid burner phone, a disposable device. This immediately set off massive alarm bells in my head. Terrell was completely obsessed with status. He carried a top-of-the-line $1,000 smartphone everywhere he went. He would never use a cheap plastic burner phone unless he was hiding something incredibly dangerous, something he absolutely could not risk Chelsea or her powerful father ever finding out about. The burner phone vibrated again in the palm of my hand. The screen lit up brightly in the dim living room. I did not need to guess a passcode or hack the device. The notification settings were configured to display the full text message preview directly on the lock screen. The sender was saved simply under the name Maya. I stared at the glowing letters, my eyes scanning the text twice to ensure I was reading it correctly. The words on the screen were a massive, earth-shattering revelation that handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy their entire alliance. The message read, "Have you forced the old man to sign the papers yet? The baby is entering the 4th month. I need that house money now before your crazy girlfriend finds out about us." I stood frozen by the sofa, staring at the glowing screen. Maya, a secret life. Terrell was playing a highly dangerous game of double-crossing a billionaire daughter while simultaneously plotting to steal my home. I quickly slipped the burner phone into my pocket, grabbed the stack of dirty dinner plates, and hurried to the kitchen. I set the dishes in the sink, turned on the water to maximum pressure to mask any noise, and pulled the cheap plastic phone back out. My thumb hovered over the screen. It was an older model relying on a simple 4-digit PIN rather than biometric security. I knew my son perfectly well. He was arrogant but profoundly unoriginal. I typed in his birth year. The screen unlocked instantly. I opened the messaging application. The thread with Maya was a goldmine of absolute, undeniable betrayal. I scrolled past weeks of digital conversations. Terrell promising her they would buy a massive house in the suburbs. Terrell complaining bitterly about Chelsea calling her a spoiled, overbearing nightmare he only tolerated for her father real estate connections. But the absolute most damning piece of evidence was an image file received just 2 days ago. I tapped the thumbnail to enlarge it. It was a black and white ultrasound photograph. The bold text beneath it read, 16 weeks today. Our little boy is growing fast. Terrell had replied with a string of heart emojis and a promise that the massive payout would be theirs by the end of the month. He was actively using my destruction to fund a secret family playing Chelsea and Richard for absolute fools. I pulled out my encrypted smartphone provided by Jonathan. Working with methodical cold precision, I photographed every single text exchange. I made sure the timestamps, the phone numbers, and the ultrasound picture were perfectly captured in high resolution. This was not just a smoking gun. It was a highly explosive detonator. If Richard Kensington found out his daughter was being used to fund another woman child, Terrell would be exceptionally lucky to leave the city breathing. I wiped the burner phone clean of my fingerprints using a damp kitchen towel, walked back into the living room, and shoved the device deep back into the exact same crevice between the sofa cushions. I returned to my bedroom, locking the heavy door behind me with a soft, deliberate click. My heart beat with a steady, tactical rhythm. It was time to introduce a massive dose of chaos into their perfect criminal partnership. I opened the encrypted phone and activated a temporary, untraceable digital number Jonathan had configured for me. It routed through multiple international servers, making it entirely impossible to track back to my location or my identity. I attached the photograph of the ultrasound and 3 screenshots of the absolute most insulting text messages Terrell had sent regarding Chelsea. For the caption, I typed a simple, devastating sentence. Thought you should know exactly who your boyfriend is really funding with your father money. I hit send, directing the multimedia message straight to Chelsea's personal cell phone. Then I opened the secure surveillance application and tapped into the hidden camera located on the back patio. I watched the live feed intensely. Terrell and Chelsea were sitting on the expensive outdoor furniture. Terrell was anxiously chewing his fingernails, clearly still rattled to his core by Richard's brutal physical threat in the dining room. Chelsea was casually scrolling through her social media feed, sipping the last of her vintage red wine. Suddenly, a notification banner popped up on her screen. Chelsea stopped scrolling. Her thumb hovered in midair. She tapped the message. The bright glow of her smartphone illuminated her face in the dark evening air. I expected a massive, violent explosion. I expected her to scream, to throw her heavy wine glass directly at Terrell, head to absolutely tear him apart right there on the concrete patio. But Chelsea was her father-daughter. She did not yell. She did not cry. She simply froze. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her pale and rigidly stiff. Her eyes darted rapidly across the screen, reading the exact messages where Terrell called her an overbearing nightmare. She stared at the ultrasound photograph for 10 agonizing seconds. She sat there in absolute terrifying silence. Then she slowly locked her phone and placed it face down on the glass table. She turned her head and looked at Terrell. The gaze she directed at him was entirely devoid of any human emotion. It was the cold, dead stare of a venomous snake observing a trapped rat. Terrell, entirely oblivious to the fact that his entire secret life had just been brutally exposed, looked over at her and offered a weak, apologetic smile. Chelsea smiled back. It was a perfect, chilling replica of a loving, supportive girlfriend. "I am going to head upstairs and take a long bath," she said, her voice perfectly smooth and steady without a single tremor. "I have a bit of a headache." She stood up, grabbed her empty wine glass, and walked calmly back inside the house. I quickly switched the surveillance camera feed to the master guest suite upstairs. Chelsea walked into the room, gently closing the bedroom door behind her. The precise moment the latch clicked shut, the fake smile instantly vanished from her face. She did not dissolve into tears of betrayal. She did not break down in romantic heartbreak. Instead, a slow, intensely malicious smirk spread across her lips. She walked over to her designer handbag, pulled out a secondary business phone, and dialed a number with rapid, aggressive jabs of her finger. "Gregory," she said sharply, her tone dropping into a ruthless, commanding register that mirrored her billionaire father. "It is Chelsea. I need you to completely revise the legal structure of the holding company we are using for the Carlton property transfer. Remove Terrell as a secondary shareholder immediately. Draft an entirely new contract that grants him absolutely zero equity in the $5 million payout once the old man is locked away. Yes, you heard me correctly. Make it absolutely ironclad. He is going to secure the conservatorship, force his father to sign the deed over, and the very second the ink dries on that document, I am throwing him out on the street with absolutely nothing. I want him ruined." She hung up the phone and tossed it onto the bed. She walked over to the vanity mirror, smoothing her hair and adjusting her posture with chilling composure. The alliance was officially shattered. They were now actively plotting to destroy each other, completely unaware that I was the one pulling all the strings from the shadows. The sun rose the next morning with a heavy, suffocating tension filling the entire house. I shuffled downstairs into the kitchen, keeping my shoulders hunched, my head bowed and my hands trembling slightly to maintain my fabricated reality. Terrell and Chelsea were already awake, standing aggressively by the marble kitchen island. The dynamic between them had shifted overnight into something dark and highly volatile. Chelsea looked at Terrell with a rigid, unyielding intensity, holding a thick, freshly printed stack of legal documents in her manicured hands. "We are completely out of time," Terrell Chelsea ordered, slamming the heavy paperwork onto the marble counter right in front of me with a loud, aggressive smack. "My father is losing his patience, and I am not waiting another second for you to act. You are going to make him sign the proxy right now. We secure the legal authority today, or we are completely finished." Terrell looked absolutely terrified, cold sweat forming on his brow as he grabbed a black ink pen and shoved it aggressively toward my chest. "Sit down, Dad," Terrell barked, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "You are signing these papers right now." I looked down at the thick stack of documents Terrell had just slammed onto the marble island. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his designer shirt. The sheer panic radiating from him was palpable. Richard Kensington had given him an absolute ultimatum, and Terrell was buckling under the massive weight of that threat. Chelsea stood right beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, tapping her manicured nails against her bicep in a rapid, agitated rhythm. She did not bother to put on her usual sweet, supportive girlfriend act. Her eyes were hard, flat, and entirely merciless. "What are these, Terrell?" I asked, letting my voice waver perfectly, pitching it high and thin to sound like a thoroughly confused and intimidated old man. I lightly touched the edge of the paper, feeling the heavy premium stock typically reserved for binding legal contracts. "These are just the annual property tax rebate forms," Dad Terrell lied smoothly, though a bead of cold sweat tracked down the side of his face. "The city sent them over last week, and I completely forgot to process them. The deadline is literally today at noon. If we do not get these signed and filed with the municipal clerk immediately, the city is going to hit you with a massive financial penalty. We could lose the house to a tax lien. You have to sign them right now so I can drive them downtown." It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Even with my feigned cognitive decline, the blatant falsehood was insulting. I let my eyes wander over the top of the pages. Beneath a hastily printed cover sheet that vaguely resembled a municipal tax form, I could clearly see the bold, capitalized legal headers peeking through. Durable power of attorney, comprehensive medical proxy, irrevocable transfer of assets. They had even managed to secure a fraudulent notary stamp on the final signature pages, pre-validating my surrender before I even picked up a pen. "We do not have all morning," Carlton Chelsea snapped, dropping the familial title of Dad entirely. The mask was fully off. Her voice was sharp and commanding, carrying the exact same tyrannical cadence her billionaire father used. "You need to sign on the 5 dotted lines marked with the yellow sticky tabs. Do it now. We have exactly 5 minutes before Terrell has to leave for the courthouse." I reached out with my right hand to take the heavy black ink pen Terrell was shoving toward my chest. As my fingers brushed the smooth metal barrel, I initiated the next critical phase of my counterattack. I commanded my hand to violently spasm. My fingers jerked open and the heavy pen slipped right through my grasp. It clattered loudly against the marble countertop before rolling off the edge and hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. I let out a soft, pathetic gasp, pulling my trembling hand back against my chest, as if I were in immense physical pain. "I am so sorry, son," I whimpered, staring down at the floor with wide, frightened eyes. "My arthritis is acting up terribly this morning. My joints are so stiff, I simply cannot grip that heavy metal pen. My hands will not stop shaking." Terrell let out a vicious, guttural groan of pure frustration. He threw his hands up in the air, pacing a tight circle in the kitchen. "Are you completely useless?" he shouted, no longer hiding his deep-seated contempt. "It is a pen. Just hold the pen and write your name. We are running out of time." Chelsea rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. She bent down to retrieve the pen from the floor, but I raised my left hand to stop her. "Wait," I murmured, reaching slowly into the breast pocket of my cardigan. "I have my own pen right here. I have used it for years to write my checks. It is very lightweight plastic. It is much easier on my swollen joints. Let me just use this one." I pulled a sleek, unremarkable black plastic pen from my pocket. It looked like a generic ballpoint you could buy in bulk at any local office supply store. It was not generic. It was a highly specialized piece of equipment provided to me directly by my attorney, Jonathan Kaplan. During our meeting, Jonathan had handed me this exact pen from a locked safe in his office. It was filled with a chemically engineered, highly volatile, disappearing ink. Upon making contact with paper, the ink appeared as a rich, dark, permanent black. But it was highly reactive to ambient air and carbon dioxide. After exactly 2 hours of exposure, the chemical bonds in the ink completely vaporized. It would vanish without leaving a single trace, not a smudge, not a shadow, not even an indentation on the paper. Terrell let out an exasperated sigh, waving his hand frantically toward the documents. "Fine. Use whatever pen you want. Just sign the pages where the yellow tabs are so we can get this over with." I leaned over the marble island, gripping the special pen with a perfectly faked, trembling grip. I carefully navigated to the first yellow tab. I pressed the tip to the paper, ensuring the ink flowed smoothly. I slowly and meticulously signed my full legal name, Carlton James Hayes. The ink was a striking, undeniable black. I moved to the second page, then the third, signing away my medical rights, my financial independence, and my physical estate. With every stroke of the pen, Terrell and Chelsea leaned closer, their eyes practically glowing with ravenous greed. They watched the black ink settle into the fibers of the thick legal paper, entirely convinced they had just executed the perfect heist. I finished the fifth and final signature, letting out a long, exhausted breath. I set the pen down on the counter. "There you go, son," I whispered, keeping my head bowed. "All done. Now the city will not take our home." Chelsea did not even wait for me to step back. She aggressively snatched the stack of papers right off the counter, her eyes rapidly scanning all 5 signatures to ensure they were legible. She clutched the documents tightly to her chest, her face erupting into a massive, triumphant grin. "We got it," she breathed, looking at Terrell with a wild, victorious energy. "It is done. We finally got it." The tension in the kitchen instantly evaporated, replaced by a toxic, arrogant jubilation. Chelsea practically sprinted to her designer leather briefcase resting on the dining table and carefully locked the documents inside. Terrell let out a massive, booming laugh, running his hands through his hair as the crushing weight of Richard's death threat lifted from his shoulders. He walked directly to the custom liquor cabinet in the corner of the living room and pulled out a chilled bottle of vintage Dom Perignon champagne. "We are not waiting for tonight," Terrell declared, aggressively popping the cork. The loud crack echoed through the house, followed by the fizzing sound of expensive alcohol. He poured 2 full glasses and handed one to Chelsea. They stood right in the middle of my living room, clinking their crystal glasses together in a toast to my total destruction. "To $5 million, Terrell cheered, taking a massive gulp. "Can you believe how incredibly easy that was? 40 years of this old fool working his fingers to the bone, building his little retirement nest, and I just took the entire thing from him in less than 5 minutes. He did not even bother to read a single sentence. He is entirely brain dead." Chelsea smirked, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. She looked at Terrell with eyes that were entirely devoid of any real affection, secretly knowing she was going to have her lawyer cut him out of the deal completely. "Yes," she agreed, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "A complete fool. To our new fortune, baby." I stood in the hallway watching them celebrate my downfall. I hunched my shoulders and slowly shuffled away toward the staircase, playing the broken, defeated elder perfectly. I walked up the stairs, my face completely blank. But inside I was laughing just as hard as they were. In exactly 120 minutes, Chelsea was going to open her expensive briefcase to hand those documents to a judge, and she was going to find absolutely nothing but 5 pages of blank white paper. Later that night, the house was plunged into total darkness. Terrell and Chelsea had gone to sleep hours ago, likely dreaming of the massive payout they believed they had secured. I sat in the darkness of my locked bedroom, the only light coming from the screen of my encrypted smartphone. I accessed the hidden surveillance network, switching between the high-definition cameras. I clicked on the feed for the back patio. The night vision instantly illuminated the space. Chelsea was standing out there alone in the freezing night air, clutching her secondary business phone tightly to her ear. She had slipped out of bed while Terrell was snoring, completely bypassing him to finalize her ultimate betrayal. Her voice was ice cold, devoid of any hesitation or morality. "I want your team here at exactly 8 in the morning sharp," Chelsea ordered, speaking to a group of private off-the-books contractors her father regularly employed for hostile evictions. "Bring the heavy moving vans and completely clear out the ground floor furniture. Grab the old man and physically throw him into the secure transport vehicle. The private psychiatric facility across the state line already has a permanent bed waiting for him. The involuntary hold paperwork is finalized. If he gets confused and tries to fight back, use whatever physical force is absolutely necessary to subdue him. I want him entirely removed from this property before noon." I stared at the digital feed, listening to her finalize the logistics of my kidnapping. They were coming for me in 8 hours. The final act of this war was set to begin, and I was fully prepared to let them walk right into the devastating ambush waiting for them. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom watching the digital clock on my nightstand shift to 3 in the morning. I had exactly 5 hours before Chelsea private extraction team arrived to drag me out of my own home. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a direct number Jonathan had given me. It belonged to Captain Miller, a highly respected veteran of the local police precinct who had worked with Jonathan on several high-profile fraud cases. Miller answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low, clear, and perfectly steady. I laid out the exact situation. I told him a team of hostile off-the-books contractors was scheduled to breach my property at 8 o'clock sharp. I explained they intended to forcibly remove me from the premises and transport me across state lines against my will under the guise of a fraudulent medical mandate. Captain Miller did not waste time with unnecessary questions. He asked for the make and model of the expected vehicles and confirmed the address. He told me he would have 3 unmarked tactical units positioned at both ends of my street and in the rear alleyway by 7:30. He instructed me to stay on the ground floor, remain completely calm, and let the intruders enter the house so the officers could catch them dead to rights on charges of breaking and entering and attempted kidnapping. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and began my preparations. I showered, shaved, and dressed in a crisp pair of tailored trousers and a button-down shirt. I was not going to meet my attackers looking like a victim. I went downstairs to the kitchen, brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, and poured myself a large mug. The house was completely silent. Upstairs, Terrell and Chelsea were sleeping soundly, utterly convinced they had successfully orchestrated the perfect crime. I walked into the living room, sat down in my favorite leather armchair facing the front foyer, and waited for the sun to rise. The digital clock on the cable box slowly ticked toward 8. My heart beat with a slow, powerful rhythm. I was not a helpless old man waiting for the end. I was a predator waiting for the trap to snap shut. At exactly 7:55, I heard the heavy rumble of a large diesel engine turning onto my quiet suburban street. Through the sheer curtains of the living room window, I watched a massive unmarked white moving truck pull up directly in front of my driveway. A dark gray utility van parked aggressively right behind it. 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They were massive, heavily built figures wearing plain black tactical gear, completely devoid of any official medical insignia. They did not look like nurses or orderlies. They looked exactly like what they were paid muscle hired to do dirty work. One of the men approached the front porch, pulling a shiny silver key from his pocket. Chelsea must have quietly slipped it to him the day before. He slid the key into the heavy deadbolt Terrell had installed, turning it with a loud metallic click. The front door swung open. The 4 men marched into my foyer, their heavy boots thudding aggressively against the hardwood floor. The lead thug, a man with a thick neck and cold, dead eyes, spotted me sitting in the armchair with my coffee mug. He pulled a pair of heavy-duty plastic zip ties from his belt and pointed a thick finger right at my chest. "Get up right now, old man," he barked, his voice rough and commanding. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Do not make me put my hands on you." I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and set the mug down on the side table. Before the lead thug could take another step toward me, the world absolutely exploded. The front door was kicked wide open, shattering the morning silence. "Police! Nobody move! Get your hands in the air right now!" A swarm of heavily armed police officers in tactical gear poured into the foyer from the front porch. At the exact same second, the glass sliding doors in the kitchen shattered as another unit breached the rear of the house. The element of surprise was absolute. The 4 hired thugs completely froze, their arrogant swagger instantly evaporating. "Drop to the ground," Captain Miller roared, leveling his weapon directly at the lead contractor. The men hit the floor instantly. The sound of heavy metal handcuffs clicking into place echoed loudly through the living room as the officers swiftly pinned the intruders to the hardwood. The violent, chaotic ambush lasted less than 20 seconds. I remained perfectly seated in my armchair watching the men who came to kidnap me get completely neutralized. The explosive shouting and the sound of breaking glass instantly woke the heavy sleepers upstairs. Footsteps thundered down the wooden staircase. Terrell and Chelsea rushed into the foyer, both still wearing their expensive silk sleepwear. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with absolute panic as they took in the scene of 4 massive men pinned to the floor by armed police officers. But Chelsea was a master manipulator. She assessed the situation in a fraction of a second and immediately pivoted into her rehearsed role. She let out a dramatic, piercing gasp and rushed forward, pressing her hands against her chest in a display of overwhelming relief. "Officers, thank goodness you are here!" Chelsea cried out, her voice trembling with perfect manufactured emotion. "It is okay, we authorize this. These men are private medical transport professionals. My father-in-law is suffering from extremely severe aggressive dementia. He has become a total danger to himself and to us. We hired them to safely transport him to a specialized psychiatric facility this morning." Terrell quickly caught on to her pivot. He nodded frantically, trying to steady his breathing. "Yes, absolutely. He has completely lost his mind, officer. We had to take legal action to protect him. I have the official court paperwork right here to prove I have full legal conservatorship over him." He sprinted to the dining room table, his hands shaking as he grabbed Chelsea designer leather briefcase. He popped the golden latches, pulled out the thick stack of legal documents we had supposedly signed yesterday, and rushed over to Captain Miller. "It is a comprehensive medical proxy and an irrevocable transfer of assets," Terrell stated proudly, shoving the papers toward the captain. "Everything is completely legal and notarized. We are in full control of this estate." Captain Miller holstered his weapon and took the thick stack of documents from Terrell's hands. He looked at the frantic, desperate couple, his expression entirely devoid of any sympathy. He slowly flipped open the cover page, scanning the first document. He turned to the second page, then the third, his brow furrowing in deep, annoyed confusion. He looked up at Terrell, his eyes narrowing into a harsh, unimpressed glare. "Medical transport," Captain Miller asked, his voice dripping with absolute authority and skepticism. "Power of attorney. What exactly are you trying to pull here, son?" Terrell puffed out his chest, pointing a trembling finger at the pages. "It is all right there in black and white. He signed his rights away to me yesterday morning." Captain Miller shoved the stack of papers aggressively back into Terrell's chest. "There is absolutely no legal authority here," Miller stated loudly, his voice carrying across the entire living room. "These pages are completely blank. There is not a single signature on any of them." Terrell and Chelsea looked down at the documents in absolute horror. The dark, permanent ink I had used the day before had entirely vaporized into thin air. Their faces drained of all blood as they stared at 5 pages of completely empty, pristine white paper. Captain Miller gave Terrell and Chelsea a final blistering warning about filing false police reports and misusing emergency services before marching the 4 handcuffed thugs out of my house. The heavy front door slammed shut, leaving a suffocating dead silence in the foyer. Terrell stared at the blank white pages in his trembling hands, his mouth opening and closing as his brain completely short-circuited. Chelsea snatched the papers from him, holding them up to the light as if the ink might magically reappear. She frantically scratched at the paper with her manicured nails, but there was nothing. The brilliant, foolproof trap they had set had completely evaporated into thin air. I remained in my leather armchair, silently sipping my cold coffee, watching their entire world collapse in real time. Chelsea pulled out her secondary phone and dialed her father's legal team, pacing the living room like a caged animal. She demanded they run an immediate title search on the property. She needed to know if the conservatorship was even necessary at this point. I watched the exact second the lawyer on the other end of the line delivered the fatal blow. Chelsea stopped dead in her tracks. The phone slipped from her ear, her jaw dropping in absolute unadulterated horror. An irrevocable trust, she whispered the words, choking in her throat as if she had swallowed glass. She slowly turned to look at Terrell, her eyes wide with pure panic. "He does not own the house anymore, Terrell. The deed was transferred to a corporate trust fund 2 days ago. We have absolutely nothing." Terrell collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands as a pathetic whimper escaped his lips. Their master plan was entirely ruined. They had spent money, forged documents, and hired thugs, all for a house that was legally untouchable. But the real nightmare was just beginning. Word traveled fast to Richard Kensington. It took exactly 3 hours for the billionaire to realize his $5 million hostile takeover had been completely derailed by the very man he thought was a brain-dead fool. Just past noon, the front door burst open with a violent crash that shook the walls. Richard Kensington stormed into my living room completely stripped of his tailored, polite billionaire facade. His tie was loosened, his face was flushed a dangerous crimson, and his eyes burned with the manic, unhinged fury of a cornered mobster. He did not bother with veiled threats or condescending small talk. He marched directly to the coffee table in front of me, reached into his tailored suit jacket, and pulled out a sleek, black, semi-automatic handgun. He slammed the heavy weapon down onto the glass surface with a deafening crack. Chelsea let out a terrified shriek, backing away into the dining room while Terrell scrambled backward over the sofa, his eyes locked on the lethal weapon. Richard ignored them, leaning over the table to glare directly into my eyes. "You think you are clever, old man," Richard spat, his voice echoing through the house like thunder. "You think you can hide this property in a trust and play games with my money? I do not have time for legal technicalities. I am Richard Kensington. I own this city." He was losing his mind, his arrogant ego unable to handle being outsmarted. The rage completely blinded his judgment, prompting him to boast about the sheer scale of his criminal empire right in my living room. "Do you have any idea how much cash I have floating around in the mayor office right now?" he screamed, pacing furiously in front of the coffee table. "I paid $2 million in untraceable offshore accounts to the zoning committee just to keep this tech hub project a secret. I handed the city planning director $500,000 in cash to ensure this specific neighborhood was marked for commercial demolition. I bought the politicians. I bought the judges. I bought the developers. This entire grid belongs to me." He pointed a trembling finger at my chest, completely abandoning all caution. "Your little residential lot is the very last piece of the puzzle. I need it to finalize the commercial borders. If I do not secure this deed by next week, the developers pull out, the tech conglomerate moves to the next county, and I lose hundreds of millions of dollars. I am not going to let a senile, washed-up civil engineer ruin the biggest real estate monopoly this state has ever seen." I sat perfectly still, my face devoid of any emotion, absorbing every single word that poured from his mouth. I did not break eye contact, nor did I look at the gun resting on the glass table. Deep inside, a powerful wave of triumph washed over me. Richard was so blinded by his own perceived supreme authority that he was handing me the ultimate victory on a silver platter. He was standing directly in front of the electrical outlet near the baseboard. Hidden inside that outlet was a state-of-the-art, high-definition camera and a high-fidelity microphone that was currently recording every syllable of his explosive rant. He had just confessed to massive multi-million-dollar federal bribery. He had named the mayor office. He had named the zoning committee. He had explicitly admitted to rigging a major commercial development project using offshore accounts. He was delivering a pristine, uninterrupted confession to severe federal crimes, racketeering, and extortion. And by slamming that loaded handgun onto my coffee table to enforce his demands, he had just elevated his white-collar financial crimes to armed criminal threats and aggravated assault. The audio was recording crystal clear. The video was capturing his face, his weapon, and his exact location. Jonathan Kaplan and the federal authorities were going to have an absolute field day with this footage. Richard Kensington was digging his own grave with a backhoe, and I was quietly sitting back, letting him do all the heavy lifting. The beautiful irony was that he believed his wealth made him invincible, unaware that his own hubris was providing the very evidence needed to lock him away for the rest of his natural life. Richard snatched the handgun off the coffee table, turning his manic, bloodshot eyes away from me and locking his deadly gaze onto his next target. He marched across the living room and grabbed Terrell by the collar of his shirt. He hauled my son to his feet, shoving him violently against the drywall. Terrell let out a pathetic, suffocated gasp, his hands flying up in a desperate attempt to defend himself. Richard raised the heavy black handgun and pressed the cold steel barrel directly against the center of Terrell's forehead. Chelsea clamped her hands over her mouth, too terrified to speak or intervene to save the man she supposedly loved. "You listen to me, you worthless piece of trash," Richard growled, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper that resonated through the silent room. "You have exactly 3 days to break that trust and get rid of this old man. I do not care what you have to do. I do not care how you do it. If I do not have the physical deed to this property on my desk by Friday morning, I'm going to come back here and put a bullet right between your eyes." Richard shoved Terrell to the floor with a disgusted grunt, tucked the gun back into his tailored jacket, and stormed out of the house. The heavy front door slammed shut behind him, leaving my son weeping uncontrollably on the hardwood floor, completely broken and staring at the horrifying reality of his own actions. The heavy thud of the front door closing behind Richard Kensington echoed through the foyer, leaving a suffocating dead silence in its wake. Outside, the low rumble of the Bentley engine faded down the suburban street, taking with it the last shred of safety Tyrell thought he possessed. My son remained on the hardwood floor, his expensive designer shirt crumpled and damp with cold sweat. His chest heaved with frantic, shallow breaths. For a long moment, the only sound in the house was the pathetic, wet sobbing of a 35-year-old man who had finally realized the lethal, inescapable consequences of his own boundless greed. He slowly lifted his head, his face stained with tears and absolute terror, and looked at me sitting calmly in my leather armchair. The arrogant predator who had mocked my supposed dementia just an hour ago was completely gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate child who had played a game far beyond his mental capacity. Tyrell scrambled across the floor on his hands and knees, practically dragging his body to my feet. He grabbed the fabric of my trousers, his knuckles turning white as he clung to me like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking violently under the weight of his panic. "Dad, you have to help me. You heard him. You heard what he said. He is going to kill me. He is going to send his men to put a bullet right between my eyes. You have to call your lawyer right now. You have to tell them to cancel the trust. Tell them it was all a huge mistake. We can transfer the deed back to your name and give it to Richard today. Please, Dad, I am your son. I am your only son. You have to save my life." I looked down at the man kneeling before me. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no paternal instinct to reach down, place a hand on his shoulder, and comfort him. The boy I had raised, the son I had worked decades to support and protect, had died the exact moment he poured crushed pills into my morning tea. I watched him weep, noting the sheer hypocritical audacity it took to beg for salvation from the very man he had plotted to utterly destroy. He was crying for his own skin, entirely unbothered by the fact that he had spent the last 2 weeks actively trying to erase my mind, steal my home, and leave me rotting in a facility. I let him cry for another full minute, letting the sheer weight of his humiliation settle into the cold air of the living room. Then I moved. I did not shuffle. I did not tremble. I stood up from my armchair with the smooth, fluid strength of a man who was in perfect physical and mental health. I looked down at Tyrell, my posture rigid, tall, and commanding. The sudden drastic shift in my demeanor hit him like a physical blow to the jaw. His sobbing hitched in his throat. His bloodshot eyes widened, darting across my face as his brain struggled to process the absolute impossibility of what he was seeing. The confused, helpless old man was entirely gone. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan, pulled out the sleek, encrypted smartphone Jonathan had provided, and unlocked the screen with a swift, steady motion. I did not yell. I did not curse at him. I simply opened the audio file I had saved from the hidden camera footage and tapped the volume to its maximum setting. The crystal-clear recording filled the living room, cutting through the tension like a knife. Tyrell's own voice, dripping with arrogant cruelty, played back to him. "This old fool will not even know what hit him. In a week, his brain will be so fried he will not even remember his own name. Once we force him to sign the proxy, we throw the old man into a cheap mental asylum, lock the door, and cash out his entire life." I pressed pause. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Tyrell let go of my trousers as if the fabric had suddenly caught fire. He fell back onto his heels, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound emerging. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, sickly pale. The horrifying realization crashed down upon him like a concrete wall. I knew. I had known everything from the very first second. The spilled tea on the laptop, the swapped medication bottles, the disappearing ink on the legal documents, the hidden cameras recording his every single move. I had not been his victim. I had been the architect of his total ruin. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and profound disbelief. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his entire body trembling. "You played us. You set us up from the start." I looked down at him, my expression carved from solid stone. "You thought you were hunting a wounded animal, Tyrell?" I said, my voice low, firm, and completely devoid of warmth. "You forgot that I spent 40 years engineering structures designed to withstand massive catastrophic pressure. I built a fortress around myself, and I quietly let you lock yourselves inside. You sold your own father for a payout you were never going to get." Terrell sat frozen on the floor, his mind entirely shattered by the revelation. He was trapped directly between the lethal armed threat of a billionaire mobster and the cold calculated vengeance of his own father. He had absolutely nowhere to run. I stepped closer to him, towering over his pathetic frame. "You are going to federal prison, Terrell," I stated clearly, laying out the absolute inescapable reality of his situation. "I have the banking records and the high-definition surveillance footage of the $25,000 Rolex you and Chelsea purchased using a fraudulent credit card in my name. That is first-degree wire fraud and aggravated identity theft across state lines. The FBI is already building the indictment with my attorney. You are looking at a minimum of 15 years behind bars." Terrell let out a suffocated, broken gasp, burying his face in his hands. "But I am going to give you exactly one alternative." I continued, my tone dropping to a sharp tactical register. "Richard Kensington just handed me a pristine recorded confession of massive federal bribery and municipal corruption. The authorities want him, and they desperately want the corrupt politicians he bought. You are going to wear a concealed wire. You are going to walk directly into the FBI field office, hand over every piece of evidence you have on Richard operations, and you are going to act as their primary inside informant to bring down his entire empire. You cooperate fully with the federal government, or I hand the credit card evidence to the local police right now and let Richard men find you in a holding cell by midnight. The choice is yours." Before Terrell could even formulate a response to the ultimate ultimatum, the sound of sharp, aggressive footsteps echoed from the dining room. Chelsea emerged from the shadows where she had been hiding during her father's explosive, violent outburst. She completely ignored Terrell, stepping right over his trembling legs as if he were nothing more than a piece of discarded garbage. She had clearly been listening to the entire exchange, but her mind was operating on a completely different frequency of sheer delusion and arrogant survival. Her face was a mask of cold, unyielding ambition. She smoothed the front of her designer dress, her eyes locking onto mine with a manic, terrifying resolve. She refused to accept defeat, blindingly trusting the power of her family money. "My father will never let you win, Carlton," she stated, her voice tight and vibrating with arrogant desperation. "He will buy the judge, he will buy the police, and he will tear that trust apart brick by brick. We are not backing down. In fact, we are accelerating the timeline." She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen with a malicious intent. "The grand engagement party will take place right here in your backyard this Saturday night," she announced, a wicked, defiant smirk spreading across her face. "I am inviting the mayor, the zoning committee, and every high society investor in this city. We are going to celebrate our massive victory right on your lawn. And by Sunday morning, you will be out on the street." Early the next morning, I sat in a highly secure conference room deep inside the regional FBI field office downtown. Jonathan Kaplan sat beside me, looking every bit the elite legal predator he was. Across the cold metal table sat Special Agent Vance, a veteran investigator who had spent the last 3 years trying to build a solid racketeering case against Richard Kensington. Jonathan slid a secured tablet across the table and hit play. The high-definition video from my living room filled the screen. Agent Vance watched in absolute silence as Richard slammed his loaded handgun onto my coffee table. He listened intently as the billionaire completely lost his temper, aggressively bragging about the $2 million in untraceable offshore accounts he had funneled to the zoning committee. He heard Richard explicitly name the mayor office and the city planning director, laying out the exact mechanics of the massive municipal bribery scheme. When the video ended, Agent Vance leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked at Jonathan, then at me. "We have been trying to flip one of Kensington low-level accountants for 18 months just to get a glimpse of his financial ledgers," Vance said, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "And you just walk in here with a pristine, uncoerced audio and video confession of first-degree federal bribery, extortion, and armed assault. This is not just a smoking gun, Carlton. This is the entire artillery depot." Jonathan folded his hands on the table, maintaining his sharp, professional demeanor. "We also have the wire fraud and identity theft evidence regarding the $25,000 luxury watch purchased by his daughter and my client's son," Jonathan added smoothly. "We are handing you the entire corrupt syndicate on a silver platter, but we need this executed perfectly. My client property and his physical safety are the absolute priorities." Agent Vance nodded, tapping his pen against the table. We are going to fast-track this indictment under the RICO Act, he stated. But to round up the entire network, we need to catch the corrupt municipal officials directly associating with Kensington on the record. That is exactly where Chelsea arrogant grandstanding plays perfectly into our hands, Jonathan replied, sliding a printed invitation across the table. She is hosting a massive engagement party at Carlton House this Saturday night. She is using the fraudulent credit card to fund a luxury catering service, and she has explicitly invited the mayor, the zoning committee members, and the entire circle of corrupt high society investors her father associates with. They are all going to be gathered in one single enclosed location, celebrating a real estate victory they believe is already finalized. Agent Vance picked up the invitation, his eyes gleaming with tactical calculation. This is a federal prosecutor dream scenario, he said. We will initiate a full-scale sting operation, but we need an inside man to ensure the key targets discuss the zoning manipulation while on the premises. We need someone they completely trust to guide the conversation. I looked Agent Vance dead in the eye. You already have your inside man, I said, my voice steady and cold. My son Terrell. He is currently trapped between Richard lethal threats and my evidence of his wire fraud. He has already agreed to wear a wire to save himself from a 15-year federal sentence. The FBI agents immediately sprang into action, transforming the conference room into a tactical command center. Over the next 48 hours, the federal government quietly and completely infiltrated my property. While Chelsea was out shopping for an absurdly expensive engagement dress, a team of undercover technicians swapped out the catering company's staff roster with highly trained federal agents. They positioned covert surveillance vans down the street disguised as standard utility vehicles. They even replaced the hired valet drivers with armed undercover operatives. Terrell was brought into a secure location and fitted with a state-of-the-art microscopic audio transmitter. The reality of his situation had entirely broken him. He was a trembling, terrified mess, sweating profusely as Agent Vance gave him his strict operational parameters. Terrell was instructed to approach Richard and the city planning director during the party, play the role of the anxious future son-in-law, and get them to explicitly confirm the offshore payments on the hidden microphone. If you deviate from the script or if you try to warn them, Vance warned Terrell, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The deal is completely off the table and you will be arrested alongside them for federal wire fraud. Do your job and you might just survive this. The night before the grand event, the atmosphere in my house was incredibly toxic. I walked out of my bedroom to get a glass of water only to find the hallway completely stripped of my personal belongings. I slowly descended the stairs, looking out through the large glass doors leading to the backyard. Chelsea was standing on the patio holding a massive black garbage bag. She was systematically pulling my clothes from the bag and throwing them directly onto the damp grass. My tailored church suits, my heavy winter coats, and even the carefully boxed sentimental items I had kept from Evelyn's side of the closet were violently tossed out into the yard like worthless debris. She was moving with a manic, ruthless energy, utterly convinced of her own supreme authority. She had spent the entire day coordinating with the luxury event planners, treating my home as if she had already bulldozed it to the ground. She did not care about the trust I had established. In her deeply arrogant mind, she believed her father's wealth and influence could crush any legal barrier Jonathan had erected. She held a glass of expensive red wine in one hand, taking casual sips while using her free hand to destroy my property. I stood silently by the glass doors, watching her desecrate my belongings. I did not yell. I did not run out to stop her. I simply watched the woman who was about to lose her absolute freedom act like the queen of a castle made entirely of sand. Chelsea turned around and spotted me standing in the kitchen. She dropped the empty garbage bag onto the patio and marched back inside, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She stopped inches from my face, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated malice. She no longer bothered to maintain even a fraction of the sweet, caring girlfriend persona. "You can stand there and look as pathetic as you want, Carlton," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a sickening, triumphant cruelty. "You thought your little legal tricks with the trust would save you. You are completely wrong. My lawyers bypassed Terrell entirely. I personally filed an emergency petition for forced medical guardianship with a judge my father practically owns. After the party tomorrow night, the medical transport unit is coming back. You are out on the street, or you can rot in the cheapest state-funded asylum they can find. This house is mine." I stared right back at her, absorbing her vicious threat without a single flinch. I offered a slow, slight nod, letting her believe she had delivered the final, fatal blow. She smirked, turned on her heel, and walked upstairs to prepare for her grand celebration. She had absolutely no idea that she had just spent the entire evening preparing a luxurious, fully catered stage for her own spectacular federal arrest. Saturday evening arrived, transforming my quiet suburban backyard into a sprawling high society gala. The sheer scale of the audacity on display was staggering. Chelsea had spared absolutely no expense. A classical string quartet played softly in the corner of the garden, their music floating over tables draped in fine imported linens and adorned with towering exotic floral arrangements. Crystal champagne flutes caught the glow of the elegant string lights strung meticulously across the patio. White-gloved catering staff moved smoothly through the crowd, offering gourmet appetizers to the city elite. Of course, none of these guests knew that the exquisite caviar and the vintage champagne flowing so freely had been completely financed by a fraudulent, ultra-premium credit card opened in my name. Chelsea was holding court near the center of the lawn, looking radiantly triumphant in a breathtaking custom-designed silk gown. She laughed and clinked glasses, playing the perfect billionaire heiress. Beside her stood Richard Kensington, holding a glass of scotch, aggressively networking with the exact targets Agent Vance wanted. I watched from the darkened window of my second-floor bedroom as the mayor arrived, shaking hands warmly with Richard. The city planning director was right behind him, clapping Richard on the back like an old friend. The corruption was happening right in the open, arrogant and entirely unchecked. Hovering nervously near the edge of the patio was Terrell. He looked absolutely miserable in his expensive tuxedo. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a napkin, completely paralyzed by the microscopic federal transmitter taped securely against his chest. Every time Richard pulled him into a conversation with the city officials, Terrell looked like he was about to physically vomit. Meanwhile, the white-gloved catering staff serving those very politicians were not culinary professionals. They were highly trained, heavily armed, undercover FBI agents silently securing the perimeter and monitoring every single word picked up by Terrell's hidden microphone. The trap was fully loaded, and the targets were happily drinking on the trigger. It was time for my resurrection. I turned away from the window and walked over to my closet. I completely ignored the oversized, moth-eaten cardigans and baggy sweatpants I had been wearing for the past 2 weeks. I reached to the very back of the wardrobe and pulled out a garment bag holding my finest custom-tailored charcoal gray Italian suit. It was the exact suit I used to wear when negotiating massive, multi-million-dollar infrastructure contracts with city developers. I took my time getting dressed. I fastened a crisp, stark white dress shirt, knotted a deep crimson silk tie, and slid a pair of silver cufflinks into place. I sat on the edge of the bed and polished my black leather Oxford shoes until they shone. I stood up and looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The hunched, trembling, forgetful old man who supposedly peed his pants on the living room sofa was completely dead. Staring back at me was a senior civil engineer, a man of profound intellect, absolute authority, and lethal tactical precision. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders were broad, my eyes were cold, sharp, and focused. I walked out of the bedroom and stepped out onto the second-floor landing. I did not shuffle. I did not hesitate. I walked down the grand wooden staircase with heavy, deliberate, and commanding steps. The rhythmic, authoritative thud of my leather shoes against the hardwood echoed through the open foyer, spilling out onto the patio. Someone near the bottom of the stairs turned around. Then another person turned. A ripple of profound confusion began to spread through the crowd. The string quartet faltered, the cellist hitting a discordant note as they stared at me. The gentle hum of elite conversation slowly ground to an absolute halt. Chelsea was mid-laugh when she finally noticed the sudden silence. She turned her head toward the house. The champagne flute in her hand tilted, spilling expensive alcohol directly onto her silk gown. Her jaw dropped. All the color instantly vanished from her face. She was staring at a ghost. Richard Kensington narrowed his cold slate-gray eyes, his arrogant smile freezing into a rigid line of absolute confusion. He recognized immediately that the man walking down those stairs was not a senile victim ready for a psychiatric ward. Terrell stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of sheer terror and awe, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Chelsea snapped out of her shocked paralysis. Her face flushed with a violent, ugly shade of crimson. She realized her perfect, triumphant narrative was instantly unraveling in front of the city's most powerful elite. She frantically waved her hand, signaling to two massive men in dark suits standing near the garden gate. They were Richard private security contractors, the muscle hired to keep out unwanted guests. "Get him out of here right now," Chelsea hissed, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at me. "Drag him back upstairs." But as the two towering security guards stepped forward to intercept me, two of the undercover FBI agents posing as caterers smoothly stepped directly into their path. The agents did not draw their weapons or cause a scene. They simply positioned their bodies with professional, immovable tactical precision, blocking the security guards from taking another step. Chelsea let out a frustrated, panicked gasp, realizing her muscle had been neutralized by the waitstaff. I completely ignored her. I did not even look in her direction. I strode straight past her, walking with unyielding momentum toward the raised wooden platform at the back of the garden. A professional master of ceremonies was standing there next to a massive LED projection screen, holding a wireless microphone, preparing to announce the engagement toast. I stepped onto the platform, looked the stunned MC dead in the eye, and firmly took the microphone right out of his hand. I stood at the absolute center of the stage, looking out over the sea of wealthy, corrupt, and utterly bewildered faces. I brought the microphone to my mouth and tapped it twice with my index finger. The sharp, heavy thumps echoed through the massive outdoor speakers, instantly commanding the attention of every single person on the property. The silence in the backyard was deafening heavy with the electric anticipation of a storm about to break. I locked eyes with Richard Kensington, then shifted my gaze to his daughter, ensuring they both saw the absolute, uncompromising ruin reflecting in my stare. I took a deep, steady breath and spoke in a clear, booming voice that resonated with absolute authority. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an engagement party funded 100% by money stolen from my credit card." The collective gasp of the crowd was a physical wave that washed over the patio. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black remote control Jonathan had provided. I pressed the single red button in the center. Behind me, the massive LED projection screen, which had been displaying a looping slideshow of Chelsea and Terrell posing in various romantic locations, instantly went black. A fraction of a second later, the screen flickered to life in brilliant, undeniable high definition. The hidden camera footage from my living room filled the massive display. The crisp, amplified audio blasted through the towering outdoor speakers, completely drowning out the stunned murmurs of the guests. The first clip played. It was 2 a.m. The night vision clearly showed Chelsea and Terrell standing by my kitchen island. The entire high society crowd watched in absolute paralyzing horror as the beautiful bride to be methodically crushed, a mysterious white powder, and poured it directly into my prescribed blood pressure medication capsules. Terrell's voice echoed across the manicured lawn. In a week, his brain will be so fried he will not even remember his own name. Before the crowd could even process the attempted murder, they were witnessing the video instantly cut to the hallway. There was Chelsea wearing her designer clothes, handing a thick manila envelope to Dr. Thorne. $10,000 in untraceable cash, just like my father promised. Her voice boomed over the speakers. "Make sure the medical affidavit is bulletproof." The final video clip loaded onto the screen, delivering the ultimate payload. It was Richard Kensington himself, standing in my living room. The billionaire slammed his black semi-automatic handgun onto the glass coffee table with a resounding crack that made several guests physically flinch. The speakers blasted his arrogant, unhinged confession to the entire gathering. "Do you have any idea how much cash I have floating around in the mayor's office right now? I paid $2 million in untraceable offshore accounts to the zoning committee just to keep this tech hub project a secret." Every single syllable of his federal bribery and extortion plot was laid bare under the string lights of the engagement party. The sheer magnitude of the explosive revelations triggered absolute, unadulterated chaos across the backyard. The meticulously curated illusion of high society elegance violently collapsed in a matter of seconds. The mayor, who had been holding a glass of vintage champagne and laughing heartily just moments ago, dropped his crystal flute. The glass shattered against the stone patio, but the sound was entirely lost in the erupting panic. He stared at the giant LED screen, the color draining from his face as he realized his political career and his freedom had just evaporated. He frantically turned and shoved his way through the crowd, desperate to reach the garden gates. The city planning director was right behind him, his face slick with terrified sweat, knocking over a table of expensive hors d'oeuvres in his blind rush to escape the blast radius of the scandal. Wealthy investors and corrupt developers scrambled like rats fleeing a sinking ship, shouting in confusion and terror. Women in expensive silk gowns tripped over their heels, while men in custom tuxedos pushed each other aggressively to get away from Richard Kensington. Amidst the frantic, screaming crowd, Chelsea stood absolutely frozen. She was paralyzed, glued to the grass, her eyes locked on the massive screen displaying her most intimate, malicious crimes. The arrogant, triumphant smirk she had worn all evening was completely eradicated. Her face was ashen, completely devoid of any blood or life. She looked like a ghost trapped inside a couture dress. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to issue a command, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She slowly turned her head to look for Terrell, the man she had planned to discard. Terrell was standing near the edge of the patio, his hands shaking violently at his sides. He did not run. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew he was wearing a federal wire. While the corrupt politicians rushed the exits, the white-gloved catering staff finally dropped their domestic disguise. The undercover FBI agents moved with lethal, coordinated precision. They did not draw their weapons yet, but they aggressively shifted their bodies to block every single exit path, subtly locking down the perimeter to ensure not a single target escaped the yard. The agents stood like brick walls across the garden gates and the side alleys. The mayor slammed right into the chest of a man he thought was a simple waiter, only to be forcefully shoved back into the center of the patio. Panic escalated into a suffocating frenzy. Chelsea finally found her voice, letting out a shrill, broken sob. She backed away, her hands clutching her head, realizing that all her father's wealth could not buy a defense against this level of pristine, publicly broadcasted evidence. Her empire of lies had burned to the ground in less than 2 minutes. While the guests panicked and the undercover agents secured the exits, Richard Kensington completely snapped. The realization that his entire criminal syndicate, his billion-dollar real estate monopoly, and his personal freedom were being publicly annihilated pushed him over the edge of sanity. He stared at the massive screen playing his own recorded confession, his chest heaving with violent, ragged breaths. The calculated, composed billionaire vanished, replaced entirely by a rabid, cornered animal. He whipped his head around and locked his bloodshot, murderous eyes directly on me. He realized I had orchestrated this entire execution. With a feral, deafening roar that cut through the screams of the fleeing guests, Richard reached deep inside his tailored suit jacket. His hand emerged, gripping the exact same black semi-automatic handgun he had slammed onto my coffee table days ago. People around him shrieked in sheer terror, diving into the grass and scrambling behind the overturned catering tables as they saw the lethal weapon. "I will kill you myself, you miserable old man," Richard bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he charged forward. He shoved past a terrified investor, his expensive leather shoes tearing up the manicured lawn as he sprinted directly toward the wooden platform where I stood. He raised the heavy black handgun, leveling the cold steel barrel squarely at the center of my chest. His finger tightened aggressively on the trigger. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, staring him down with absolute, unflinching resolve. Before Richard could fully depress the trigger, the perimeter of the property was violently breached. The massive French doors leading from my living room to the patio shattered inward with a deafening, explosive crash. The terrifying, ear-piercing wail of heavy federal sirens instantly ripped through the night air, completely surrounding the estate from every possible direction. Brilliant strobes of red and blue emergency lights flooded the backyard, casting wild, chaotic shadows across the panicked crowd. Heavily armed FBI SWAT operatives in full tactical body armor poured through the shattered glass doors and swarmed over the tall garden brick walls like an unstoppable tide. "FBI, drop the weapon right now." The commanding, thunderous voice of Captain Miller echoed through an amplified megaphone. A dozen blinding red laser sights simultaneously painted the chest of Richard Kensington's tailored suit. The trap had officially violently snapped shut. Richard froze instantly. The terrifying reality of a dozen federal assault rifles aimed directly at his heart completely overrode his blinding, murderous rage. His fingers slipped from the trigger. The heavy black handgun slipped from his grasp, hitting the wooden platform with a dull, heavy thud. In a fraction of a second, 3 heavily armored SWAT operatives swarmed the platform and tackled the billionaire violently to the ground. His expensive custom-tailored suit was shoved aggressively into the dirt and spilled champagne. He thrashed like a wild animal, roaring obscenities and threatening to sue the entire federal government, but the officers easily overpowered him, pinning his arms sharply behind his back. The harsh, metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed over the noise of the panicked crowd. Richard Kensington, the untouchable real estate titan who truly believed his money made him a god in this city, was officially under federal arrest. His empire was dead. Across the patio, Chelsea attempted to quietly back away into the shadows of the garden hedges, hoping to slip through the chaos unnoticed. Her escape lasted exactly 3 seconds. 2 undercover agents who had been serving gourmet caviar just minutes prior grabbed her arms with uncompromising force. Chelsea let out a shrill, indignant shriek, struggling wildly against their iron grip. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly across her face. "Do you know who my father is? I will have your badges for this. I will ruin your lives." Agent Vance stepped forward, completely unbothered by her hysterical, arrogant threats. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "We know exactly who your father is," Chelsea Vance stated in a calm, highly authoritative voice. "And we know exactly who you are. You are under arrest for first-degree wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the attempted poisoning and abuse of a vulnerable senior citizen. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you start doing immediately." The agents forced her wrists behind her back and secured the cuffs tightly. Her breathtaking custom silk gown was stained with wine and grass. The glamorous billionaire heiress was abruptly reduced to a weeping, humiliated criminal in front of her entire high society circle. The sheer panic of facing federal prison completely shattered whatever twisted, superficial loyalty Chelsea still held. As the agents dragged her toward the shattered French doors, she locked eyes with Terrell, who was standing completely still near the overturned catering tables. Her fear instantly mutated into a vicious, desperate malice. She thrashed against the federal agents, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my son. It was him, she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the ruined garden. He is the one who planned all of this. He wanted his father money. He is the one who crushed the pills and put them in the tea. He forced me to use the credit card. I am a victim. He manipulated me. She was throwing the man she supposedly loved entirely to the wolves, frantically trying to build a pathetic legal defense out of thin air, completely willing to watch him burn if it meant she could save herself. Terrell stood there watching the woman who had treated him like garbage finally reveal her absolute lack of a soul. The sheer audacity of her lies seemed to snap something deep inside his mind. The terrified, subservient boy who had cowered before her billionaire father completely vanished. Terrell let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded almost maniacal in the cool night air. He marched toward her, stopping just a few feet away, entirely ignoring the heavily armed federal agents flanking her. "You really think you can talk your way out of this one, Chelsea?" Terrell spat, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom and deeply rooted resentment. "You think your daddy money can bribe the FBI after they just watched him confess on a 50-foot screen?" He looked at her with absolute disgust and spat right onto the grass at her feet. "I gave them everything, Chelsea. I gave them the hidden camera footage. I gave them your bank records. And I have been wearing a federal wire against my chest all night long. Every single word you and your father said tonight is locked in a federal vault. You are not a victim. You are going to rot in a concrete cell for the next 20 years, and I handed them the keys." Chelsea's face went entirely slack. The horrifying realization that Terrell, the man she had planned to completely discard and leave with absolutely nothing, had actively engineered her federal destruction, hit her like a speeding freight train. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream of pure rage, lunging toward him with bared teeth, but the agents easily hauled her backward and dragged her forcefully out of the yard. Her frantic shrieks faded into the flashing neon lights of the police cruisers parked out front. The chaotic yard slowly began to clear as the local police rounded up the corrupt politicians, the panicked investors, and the remaining guests for strict federal questioning. Terrell stood alone on the damp grass, the adrenaline of his explosive confrontation with Chelsea rapidly evaporating into the cold night air. He looked down at his trembling hands, the crushing reality of his own inescapable situation crashing down upon him. He had cooperated with the FBI. He had delivered Richard Kensington and his deeply corrupt municipal network on a silver platter. But his immunity deal was not a free pass to walk away cleanly. He had still actively participated in a highly illegal conspiracy to drug me, steal my identity, and seize my home. Agent Vance walked over to him, his expression completely stern and unreadable. "You did exactly what we asked tonight," Terrell Vance said, his voice flat and profoundly professional. "The federal prosecutor will absolutely take your full cooperation into account during your sentencing hearing, but you still committed serious felonies. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Terrell did not fight. He did not argue or attempt to run. He slowly turned around his shoulders, slumping in total defeat, and allowed the federal agent to place the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The reality of his complete and utter downfall finally broke him. As Vance began to gently escort him toward the shattered glass doors of the home he had tried to steal, Terrell stopped. He turned his head and looked up at the wooden platform where I was standing. The arrogant predator from 2 weeks ago was completely erased from existence. He was just a broken, weeping boy staring at the father he had brutally betrayed. Huge, genuine tears streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the cold sweat on his cheeks. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking with absolute, agonizing regret. "Dad, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. Please just say you forgive me. I lost my way. Please, Dad." I looked down from the platform at my only son. I saw the tears streaming down his face. I heard the desperate, broken plea for forgiveness echoing across the empty yard. But my heart was entirely guarded, completely shielded by the impenetrable fortress of reality. I thought about the poisoned herbal tea. I thought about the fake doctor he brought into my living room. I thought about the cruel, arrogant laughter he shared with Chelsea while meticulously planning to erase my mind and steal the home I had worked 40 years to build. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I walked to the edge of the wooden stage, looking down at him with cold, unwavering eyes. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal clarity that carried directly to him over the persistent hum of the police sirens outside. "My lawyer made a very valid point the other day, Terrell," I stated firmly, offering him absolutely no emotional comfort. "Prison is still a hell of a lot safer than a bottom-tier mental asylum. Enjoy your stay." I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him to weep bitterly as the federal agents hauled him out into the flashing neon lights of the street. The federal justice system moves with a notorious grinding slowness, but in our case the wheels turned with a devastating, unstoppable velocity. The trial of Richard Kensington Chelsea and my son was not a drawn-out legal battle. It was a rapid, brutal execution of justice. The evidence I had systematically gathered was absolutely ironclad, leaving the defense attorneys with absolutely no room to maneuver. Federal prosecutors did not have to rely on circumstantial theories, questionable timelines, or unreliable witnesses. They walked into the courtroom armed with pristine, high-definition audio and video recordings of every single crime committed. Richard hired the most expensive, ruthless defense litigators money could buy on the eastern seaboard, but they were entirely powerless against the digital fortress I had built. I sat in the front row of the gallery every single day wearing my custom-tailored suits, watching them squirm under the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse. The defense tried every desperate, pathetic tactic in the legal playbook. They attempted to suppress the hidden camera footage, claiming it was an illegal invasion of privacy and an unauthorized wiretap. The judge immediately struck down the motion with extreme prejudice, ruling that the recordings were made legally within my own domicile to document an ongoing, life-threatening felony. They tried to paint Chelsea as a naive, manipulated young woman who was emotionally coerced by my son into committing the financial crimes. That false narrative evaporated the exact second the prosecutor played the crystal-clear audio of her handing $10,000 in cash to the fraudulent doctor, explicitly demanding he forge my medical affidavit. Her own voice, cold and malicious, echoed off the courtroom walls, instantly destroying any illusion of her innocence. And then there was Terrell. True to his federal immunity agreement, my son took the witness stand for the prosecution. He detailed the entire timeline of the conspiracy. He explained how they tampered with my blood pressure medication, how they opened the fraudulent credit lines, and how Richard orchestrated the municipal bribery to steal my property. Terrell looked completely hollowed out, his testimony delivered in a monotone, defeated voice. He never once looked in my direction. The jury did not even need a full afternoon to deliberate. They returned with guilty verdicts on every single federal charge. The sentencing phase was a spectacular display of absolute ruin. The federal judge, a stern, uncompromising woman with zero tolerance for white-collar predators or elder abuse, did not hold back. She looked down at Richard Kensington from her elevated bench and delivered a blistering reprimand regarding his unchecked greed and his arrogant, delusional belief that wealth elevated him above the law of the land. Richard's face was a mask of furious, impotent rage as she slammed the heavy wooden gavel down. She sentenced the billionaire to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He would be nearly 90 years old before he ever tasted freedom again. Furthermore, the federal government initiated a massive sweeping civil asset forfeiture. The Kensington real estate empire was completely dismantled piece by piece. His offshore accounts were permanently frozen, his fleet of luxury vehicles was seized, and his vast holding companies were aggressively liquidated to pay millions in municipal fines and court-ordered restitution. He lost his freedom, his fortune, and his legacy in a single afternoon. Chelsea fared no better. Stripped of her designer silk gowns and her billionaire safety net, she stood before the judge trembling in a standard-issue oversized orange prison jumpsuit. For her central undeniable role in the wire fraud, the aggravated identity theft, and the attempted poisoning of a vulnerable senior citizen, the judge handed her a highly severe 15-year federal sentence. She collapsed into uncontrollable hysterical sobs as the marshals approached to place her in handcuffs, screaming frantically for her father to do something to buy her way out. But Richard was already being dragged out of the courtroom in heavy steel chains, completely unable to save himself, let alone his daughter. Finally, it was Terrell turned to face the music. His cooperation with the FBI was the only thing that saved him from a decades-long sentence alongside them. But the judge made it exceedingly clear that his vicious betrayal of his own father was a profound moral failure that demanded strict punishment. Terrell was sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional facility. As the armed bailiffs escorted him away from the defense table, he stopped and looked back at the gallery. Our eyes met for the very last time. I offered him no smile, no tears, and absolutely no forgiveness. I simply watched him disappear behind the heavy wooden doors, a stranger who had chosen his own disastrous path and met his inevitable destruction. With the conspirators securely locked away in federal cells, the heavy, suffocating cloud that had hung over my life completely dissipated. I returned to my quiet suburban home, the very battleground where I had patiently orchestrated their downfall, and resumed my peaceful retirement. But the grand finale of this entire ordeal, the true validation of my methodical strategy, was yet to come. A mere 3 weeks after the sentencing concluded, the City Council held a highly publicized press conference at City Hall. The local news networks interrupted their regular broadcasting for the live groundbreaking announcement. The sealed municipal documents were finally open to the public. A massive global technology conglomerate officially announced their multi-billion-dollar project to the world. They were constructing their new flagship data center and commercial tech hub directly on top of my neighborhood grid. The zoning laws were officially rewritten and ratified that exact same afternoon. The quiet, unassuming suburban streets were instantly transformed into the most highly coveted commercial real estate in the entire state. The financial frenzy that Richard Kensington had tried to illegally monopolize exploded into the open market. Corporate developers descended upon the neighborhood like a swarm of locusts, desperately trying to secure the prime parcels of land necessary for the massive infrastructure project. Property values skyrocketed immediately, just as Richard had predicted, but he was rotting in a concrete cell while I held the keys to the kingdom. I was sitting on my back patio sipping a cup of freshly brewed black coffee and enjoying the crisp morning air when I heard a car pull into my driveway. A few moments later, Jonathan Kaplan walked through the back gate. My attorney looked impeccably sharp in a navy blue suit, carrying a thick leather portfolio under his arm. He walked up the patio steps with a massive, victorious smile plastered across his face. He pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and placed the heavy portfolio directly onto the outdoor glass table. He did not even bother with a casual greeting. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the leather case, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the ultimate legal victory. Carlton, Jonathan said, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. I just spent the last 48 hours fielding frantic calls from the biggest corporate acquisition teams in the country. There are currently 3 major international tech corporations lining up in a massive, aggressive bidding war for your specific lot. They need your exact acreage to finalize the central blueprint for the hub. I smiled, taking a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. And where exactly do we stand right now, Jonathan? Jonathan popped the golden latches on his portfolio and slid a binding, meticulously drafted legal contract across the table. We do not stand, Carlton. We sit back and collect. They locked the final purchase price of this house at exactly $6.5 million. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the outdoor glass table. $6.5 million. The number was printed clearly in bold, black ink right at the center of the primary purchase agreement. I let out a slow, steady breath, feeling the profound, undeniable weight of the moment settling over the patio. This was the exact property Richard Kensington had tried to steal for a fraction of its worth to secure his illegal empire. This was the very house my own son had been willing to trade my sanity, my safety, and my absolute freedom to secure. They had shed blood, lied, cheated, and destroyed their entire lives for the promise of this real estate gold mine. And here it was sitting peacefully in front of me on a beautiful Tuesday morning, voluntarily offered by legitimate corporate developers who were absolutely thrilled to pay a massive premium. Jonathan handed me his silver fountain pen, the very same heavy metal pen I had used to sign the irrevocable trust just weeks prior to lock my family out. There was absolutely no hesitation in my mind. I did not blink. I did not second-guess my decision for a single microsecond. I took the pen and firmly signed my name on the dotted line of the contract. With that single deliberate stroke, I authorized Jonathan to dissolve the protective trust and execute the transfer of the deed. I was closing the chapter on this suburban battleground permanently and profitably. The corporate developers would bulldoze the house within a month to lay the sprawling concrete foundation for their new flagship data center. Every room where Chelsea had sneered at me, every hallway where Terrell had plotted my demise, and the very kitchen where they had tried to poison my morning tea would be completely erased from the face of the earth. It was a deeply fitting end. I handed the signed contract back to Jonathan. He secured it inside his leather portfolio and gave me a firm, highly respectful handshake. By Friday afternoon, the transaction was officially complete. The funds cleared the Federal Reserve and successfully settled into my private encrypted accounts. I was sitting on a massive mountain of liquid wealth, but I knew exactly what I needed to do with a significant portion of it. The massive influx of cash was incredibly liberating, but it also carried a deep, profound sense of moral responsibility. I thought about my late wife, Evelyn. I thought about her unwavering wisdom, her sharp intuition, and her deep capacity for love. She had warned me about the darkness growing inside our son long before I was ever willing to see it. She knew the absolute dangers of unchecked greed and entitlement. If I had listened to her sooner, I might have spared myself the immense heartbreak of Terrell's ultimate betrayal. I could not change the past, but I could absolutely shape the future and honor her memory in the most powerful, impactful way possible. I called Jonathan back to my temporary hotel suite later that week to draft an entirely new set of complex legal frameworks. I instructed him to instantly wire a staggering $2 million from my recent real estate profits into a brand new, highly protected, philanthropic endowment. We officially established the Evelyn Hayes Foundation for Elder Advocacy. It was not just a basic charity that handed out informational pamphlets or offered generic advice. It was a highly aggressive, fully funded legal strike force designed specifically to protect vulnerable senior citizens from the exact type of predatory family members I had just defeated. I structured the foundation to provide immediate financial grants for top-tier defense attorneys, elite private investigators, and independent, unbiased medical evaluations. If an elderly individual suspected their children were attempting to force a fraudulent conservatorship hire, corrupt doctors like Dr. Thorne, or steal their financial assets, the foundation would instantly deploy professionals to aggressively secure their rights in federal court. We funded the installation of covert surveillance systems for at-risk seniors and established secure, anonymous, safe housing protocols for those needing immediate physical extraction from abusive domestic environments. I essentially took the exact tactical playbook I had used to dismantle Richard Kensington and my son and made it freely available to any older person fighting for their life and dignity. Knowing that my money was actively hunting down greedy, abusive relatives and protecting the innocent brought me a profound sense of peace. Evelyn's legacy was no longer tied to the tragic, shameful betrayal of our only son. Her name was now globally synonymous with justice, relentless protection, and absolute, unyielding strength. With the foundation fully operational and my personal financial future secure beyond any reasonable measure, I decided it was time to physically leave the past behind. I packed a few cherished personal items, left the rest of my old belongings to local charities, and booked a first-class flight to the West Coast. I wanted a complete change of scenery, a place where the air felt entirely new and utterly unburdened by the dark ghosts of family betrayal. I purchased a breathtaking state-of-the-art penthouse located on the very top floor of a luxury high-rise in sunny California. The expansive residence featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Pacific Ocean. Every single morning, I wake up to the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline and the brilliant orange glow of the sun rising over the endless water. My new home is equipped with the most advanced elite security features available on the commercial market. But this time, the high-definition cameras and biometric locks are not there to trap an infiltrating enemy or record a confession. They are simply there to guarantee my absolute peace of mind. I live my life with total freedom, massive resources, and complete autonomy. I am 69 years old, but I feel like a man 20 years younger. I spend my afternoons reading complex engineering journals, trying out expensive new coastal restaurants, and taking long, quiet walks along the sandy beach. I travel internationally whenever I want without checking in with anyone or justifying my expenses. I am surrounded by sheer beauty, absolute safety, and a profound, quiet strength. The toxic, chaotic noise of Terrell and Chelsea is nothing more than a faded, distant memory locked away in a federal evidence vault. I survived the most brutal, intimate psychological war imaginable, and I emerged on the other side not as a broken victim but as an absolute conqueror. Sitting on my sprawling glass balcony with a crystal glass of aged bourbon in my hand, listening to the cool ocean breeze, I often reflect on the true nature of loyalty and survival. The absolute hardest lesson I ever had to learn was that shared blood does not automatically equal unconditional love or guaranteed safety. Your own flesh and blood can look you dead in the eye, smile warmly, and quietly plot your absolute destruction for a payout. Blood can betray you with terrifying, callous ease. But a sharp mind, a resilient, unbroken spirit, and meticulous tactical preparation will never abandon you in your darkest hour. Society looks at gray hair, slightly slower movements, and lined faces, and immediately assumes incompetence. They see an older person and desperately confuse their quiet patience for ignorance and their gentle kindness for exploitable weakness. That is the greatest, most fatal miscalculation a predator can ever possibly make. I let them think I was a helpless, fading, confused old man. I let them aggressively underestimate me while I quietly engineered their permanent catastrophic downfall from the shadows. They truly thought they were playing a brilliant, masterful game of chess against an amateur, but they never realized they were simply disposable pawns placed exactly where I wanted them on my board. If there is one final truth I want to impart, it is that you must never set yourself on fire simply to keep your family warm. We are conditioned to believe that a parent must sacrifice everything, including their own dignity and safety, for the sake of their children. But true love is never parasitic. Drawing a hard line, protecting your assets, and refusing to be a victim is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-respect. You owe it to the life you have built to defend it fiercely no matter who stands on the other side of the battlefield. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments how you have stood your ground against toxic people in your own life.